Recap: Tim finds his wife cheating on him with multiple affair partners, with and without her will. But she wanted variety in her life. At least that is what she convinced herself with. Tim's actions leave her and her lovers in a desperate life and death situation, and later hires a lawyer to file for his divorce. Karen wants to become a better wife and reconcile with her husband, but Tim, with all the evidence of her cheating, is far away from it. Tim files for divorce and wants full custody of his sons, and gets temporary custody till the divorce is final. One of Karen's lovers attacks Tim with deadly intent and leaves him in hospital. Even in hospital, Tim is not safe, and there is an attempt to poison him. Tim tries to catch his would-be assassins, but is not successful. Now for the next part. The sheriff, however, did not escape. The Rangers took him into custody without a fight and transported him to Austin for questioning. Randy and Tim gave statements to Rangers Boyd and Bird, and then Randy took Tim to the houseman's home. After he escorted him inside, and they assured the assembly of concerned attorneys that they were all right, Randy left to go have the most difficult conversation of my 3-year marriage with my wife. Andy and Patty stopped him, invited him into her office, and closed the door. Jimmy told Tim to meet him in the kitchen, carried Tim's small bag to his room, and returned to the meal he was cooking. He asked, and Tim recounted the events of the day. Jimmy shook his head repeatedly as the story proceeded, aghast at the lawlessness. They heard a door open, and a sweet voice called out, "I'm here. Where is everyone?" Jimmy called, "In here," and Tim hid behind the door. The gorgeous science teacher entered the kitchen wearing her school clothes, a modest dress and low heels. She asked Jimmy, "Why is a sheriff's car outside?" Jimmy smiled, and Tim pounced on her from behind. She shrieked, twisted away from him, and then jumped into his one-armed embrace with a loud cry when she saw Tim grinning at her. "You're home. Oh, my goodness. It is so good to see you, all dressed and walking around. How are you?" "Good enough to get out," he replied, still holding her lush body against his. "And it's good to see you in a more comfortable dress and heels. The last time I saw you..." Jeannie poked him in the belly and shushed him, while cutting her eyes toward Jimmy. "See, Tim, I'd have gone the other way," Jimmy interjected. "Sure, she looks great today. Hell, she'd look great in a gunny sack. But I'm still having flights of fantasy after seeing her in that electric blue dress and 4-inch heels." "You never mentioned having flights of fantasy when I've worn that dress, Mr. Houseman," Patty stated in a cold voice, softened by a tiny grin. "That, baby," replied Jimmy in a deep voice while walking toward her, "is because I knew I'd see it on the floor before long. With Jeannie, it's all in the imagination. You better quit while you are ahead, mister. Now I know why I got attacked several times last night," Patty said with scrunched-up eyes, but the hint of a grin still on her full lips. Alan and Randy had moved into the kitchen also. Both laughed, and Alan enthusiastically attested. "She did cause flights of fantasy wherever she went. Chad and I talked about it after she turned us down and we left the hospital, but I can't repeat what we said or describe my fantasy last night. Unfortunately, I missed the sight," Randy added, "but the nurses that were on duty had plenty to say. I'm not sure a couple of them didn't have flights of fantasy after she left last night." Jeannie's pretty face and neck got redder with each compliment, and the little you could see with her head buried on Tim's chest was now almost purple. "Maybe they are right, Jeannie. Maybe you should go clean up and put that blue dress on for supper," Tim said sincerely. She frowned as she looked up at him and started to respond, but Patty exclaimed, "I think that is a fabulous idea. Will dinner be ready by 7, Master Chef Shock?" He nodded. The girls locked arms and swayed out of the room in unison. The men watched, the women walked down the hall, and Jimmy warned, "We've gone and done it now, boys. Patty loves a challenge. It's gonna be breathtaking. So prepare yourself. Randy, how's about you call your wife, tell her to doll up, and come over for supper? I've cooked more than enough." Randy looked stricken. All the enjoyment of the last few minutes was erased by the mention of his wife. I don't think that is a good idea. We're having some problems and need to talk. Do you think a good meal will make the talk harder?" Alan asked. "I'd think an hour or two of conversation with new friends, a glass of wine or two, and it would be easier to have that talk. She seems to really love you, and it seems she is miserable about the whole damn mess. You can leave your patrol car here and pick it up in the morning, or you can take it and we'll bring your wife's car to her early in the morning. Right, guys?" Randy's equivocation played across his face before resolve won out. "Can I use the phone in the office?" Jimmy nodded in approval and went off to tell his wife about the invitation. When he was gone, Tim asked Alan, "So? He's a client, so I can't talk about it, but let's just say he really, really wants the truth to be what it seems. She's the innocent who was intimidated and used by the evil sheriff. If she comes clean, convinces him that's the truth, and she will never lie to him again. She's going to get to keep her husband and family. In my opinion, of course. Sadness flooded Tim. He told them he was going to clean up and get dressed for supper, and walked away, thinking that his wife and his life weren't going to have that option. He was headed for divorce, probably a custody battle, a life without the one with whom he thought he would grow old, and possibly weekly visits with his sons, unless he unleashed the hounds of hell on his wife and destroyed her. There were no good solutions to their situation. Unable to change his bandages with one hand, Tim settled for shaving, cleaning, and rinsing himself with a washcloth, and dressing in tan slacks and a forest green sweater. He joined the other 3 men in the kitchen and accepted a cold beer. The beef bourguignon was ready, but the ladies weren't, so they stood around the kitchen and visited while they waited. When the doorbell rang, Randy started to go get it, but Jimmy insisted he go greet the guest. He returned with a stunning 5 feet 9 inches brunette with long hair, an olive complexion, and sky blue eyes, dressed in jeans and high heels. She looked so young, innocent, and vulnerable that Tim's heart went out to her and to Randy. He hoped she had been duped and extorted, and unlike his wife, hated every moment of it. Just as it softened his heart toward Jennifer, it hardened his resolve to utterly destroy the perpetrators and to do it soon. When he was introduced, Tim saw her stiffen, then look guiltily away. He knew she had put his name together with his wife, with whom she had engaged in sex on camera. He effusively greeted her, gave her a light hug, and offered her a kindly smile when she stepped away. Her features relaxed a bit as she decided maybe he didn't know, but she still looked nervous. As she returned to her husband's side after exchanging greetings and abrazos in the Texas way, she clung to his arm. Randy smiled at her, but it was clear that he was also struggling. It showed in the stiffness of his body and in the tightness around his lips. The entrance of Patty and Jeannie broke the uneasiness in the kitchen. Both looked good enough to eat in tight jeans, V-neck sweaters, and high heels, matching Jennifer. They rushed to her, introduced themselves, told her how cute she looked, and asked about her kids. Their conversation grew more animated as she talked about their 2 daughters. Tim pulled on Randy's shirt sleeve and motioned to follow him out the door into the living room. "We can all see how tense you are, Randy, and if we can, then I know your wife can. Let me give you some free advice, which will be worth every penny it costs. Trust in her. Yes, she screwed up by not telling you. But unless I'm a terrible judge of people, she's totally in love with you." Karen said she did the things the sheriff ordered her to do with great reluctance and many tears. What you need to do, in my opinion, is get her story, judge it the same way you would a suspect, and, if you believe her, forgive her. Make her telling you anything and everything that bothers her a commandment, and make every effort to gain her trust 100%. You and I did nothing wrong, but both of us seem to have failed to make our wives trust us completely and without reservation, to have confidence that we will help them in any circumstances. If they had, neither would have been lured into this cesspool. I doubt I will get the chance, but you will. Clear the air, forgive her, and make her trust you completely. Randy's countenance reflected his indecision, but he assured Tim he would give her the opportunity to come clean and explain before he made any decisions. They walked back into the kitchen with Tim's hand on Randy's shoulder, smiling, and Jennifer's look of concern disappeared. She re-engaged in the conversation. Master Chef Jacques announced Z's supper was ready and beckoned to the large table. They took seats as couples, with Jeannie beside Tim. The meal was delicious, and the apple tart tatin served by Patty for dessert was sublime. Everyone but Randy and Tim had indulged themselves in the excellent wine, and they were babbling happily. Randy wasn't drinking because he had to drive his wife home, and had to lead an unpleasant conversation that would change both their lives and the lives of their children. Tim wasn't drinking because his doctors told him liquor and pain pills were not a good combination, and he wanted to be in full control of his faculties in these troubling times. The group was still sitting at the dining table, talking when the sound of gunfire erupted. Randy yelled for the women to get on the floor, crawl into the kitchen, and hide in the pantry. He pulled his pistol and told the other men to grab guns if they had them. Tim immediately crawled across the living room to the closet where he had stashed a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol, and an ammo bag. He was crawling back, pushing the shotgun and ammo bag in front of him, with the rifle slung over his shoulder and the pistol in his right hand, when bullets smashed through the glass in the front door and also through the glass in the kitchen windows. Jimmy had crawled into the pantry to retrieve a shotgun he had hidden there, and learned that the women had gone down the stairs into the cellar. Tim gave the shotgun to Alan and secured a vantage between the dining and living rooms that gave him a view of both the kitchen and front doors. He yelled at Jimmy to watch the back door, which was triple locked and had an alarm. When they saw the flash of a gun and more bullets hit the kitchen windows, Tim returned fire with his rifle and Randy fired his pistol at the flashes. Tim shifted his attention back to the front door, and when he saw someone was trying to break it open, he fired twice into the door near the frame. He heard a yelp, so he fired twice more. They remained hyper-vigilant, guns at the ready, heads on a swivel, but there was no more gunfire or attempts to break in. During the firefight, Randy had retrieved his handheld radio and called for backup, and they soon heard sirens. Randy updated the situation, and within a few minutes there were spotlights roaming across the yard, followed by knocking on the door. Randy went to the door with his gun in its holster. Tim kept his rifle at the ready, just in case. 2 uniformed officers from the local PD came inside. They conversed with Randy, and 2 more came through the side door into the kitchen. Tim laid his rifle on the floor and stood up with his hands held even with his shoulders. Alan did the same with the shotgun. The women emerged from the pantry, startling the 2 officers. Tim quickly explained that the women had been in the pantry since the shooting started, and the local Elios apologized for pointing guns at them. They beamed in return, and thanked them for coming so quickly to save us. The security guard had been shot. It wasn't life-threatening, but he was an off-duty cop, and the police weren't at all pleased. Tim knew that would further intensify the manhunt, and he moved off to the side while he considered whether he wanted them captured or killed by his hand. Jimmy had caused quite a stir by reappearing from the back carrying his shotgun, but Randy diffused the situation, and the detective who had arrived gathered everyone in the living room. They were offered the opportunity to tell what happened. Their attorneys, Patty and Alan, told the story, including a reference to Randy having brought Tim from the hospital and being asked to stay for supper. The detective held up a hand with a worried brow and asked Randy if they were the targets in an attempted murder earlier that day. Randy advised him that they were, and the detective doubled down on his concern. "So, these guys are serious about taking you 2 out, aren't they? Do you know who they are?" Everyone looked to Tim, who looked at his 3 attorneys. "Shouldn't one of you?" Alan replied that Tim was the right person to answer. He recounted a very brief overview of the events from the blizzard until now, excluding anything about Jennifer being in the spicy films. When he mentioned the films Karen was in, he watched her for telltale signs. Jennifer blanched, grew wobbly on her feet, and looked at her husband. He put his arm around her shoulders, but continued looking at Tim. The story told, questions asked and answered. The tired troop told the officers goodbye, and then welcomed those left on guard duty to use the kitchen door to access the toilet as needed. Jimmy handed one a key, and the troop returned to the living room. Jennifer called the next-door neighbor in Jonestown who was babysitting for her, and she agreed to keep their children overnight at her house. Alan was also staying overnight at the Houseman's, leaving 1 bedroom in the 5-bedroom house available for the Jacksons. Jimmy offered to show them to their room. Randy fell in behind him, and Alan, Jeannie, and Patty turned and proceeded to their respective bedrooms. Tim held back and motioned for Jennifer to come to him. She looked afraid, watching her husband's back. "I think you figured out that I'm Karen's husband, but I mean you no harm. Jennifer, tonight and tomorrow are very important to you. Be honest with Randy, explain fully, and answer every question he asks fully and completely. If you do, I think things will be all right." She appeared to be on the verge of tears when she quietly argued, "If I do, he will leave me. He can't ever know what happened. Jennifer, he's a cop. He knows a lot more than you think. I'm warning you. Be honest." Tim whispered back urgently, and then took her arm and escorted her toward their assigned bedroom before breaking off and turning into his. He watched her enter her bedroom nervously, and wished someone could have had that conversation with his wife when she first started down that road. Perhaps. Saturday morning announced itself with the smell of bacon and biscuits, and the appearance of a grinning blonde announcing, "Up and at him, sleepyhead. Breakfast is getting cold." Tim threw the sheets back and climbed out of bed without thinking, and only realized he was naked when he saw the look on Jeannie's face. Too late now, he thought, and walked nude into the bathroom. He glanced over his shoulder to check, and caught sweet Jeannie still ogling his nakedness. When he grinned and asked, "Like what you see?" she turned red from hair to chest and fled the doorway. Timmy was greeted with laughter when he entered the kitchen, and Jeannie turned red again. "What did you do to this sweet girl, you pervert?" Patty asked. She had been blushing ever since she returned from waking you up. That evoked even louder laughter and a deeper blush. Tim shrugged his shoulders and held his palms up. "Me? I was sleeping when someone loudly and rudely told me to get up. I got out of bed as commanded and went to the bathroom. She's the pervert. She was ogling me from the moment I kicked the covers off until I escaped into the bathroom. Randy, Jennifer, Alan, Patty, and Jimmy roared with laughter, and Jeannie turned purple with embarrassment before sputtering, "I didn't know you would be sleeping naked." The roar reverberated as the others almost fell out of their chairs laughing, and Tim answered Jeannie with mock indignation. A lady would have averted her eyes. "You ogled me, and you were blatant about it. You look all innocent and demure, but now I know better." She first laid her head on the table while the others laughed uproariously, and then she gave up and started laughing too. "See, there isn't a gentleman or lady among you," Tim accused loudly. "If there were, you would tell her not to look at me like a piece of meat. I'm totally humiliated." Jennifer took a sip of her coffee, looked him over, and saucily proposed, "Well, from what I can see, you don't have anything to be humiliated about, but I didn't see you naked." They all roared again. Tim gave up the ghost of pretense, grinned, kissed Jeannie on top of her head, and threatened, "Turnabout is fair play, you perv." He laughed when she turned red again and went to the coffee pot. Scrambled eggs, bacon, and homemade biscuits with butter and peach preserves. "Somebody knows just what I like," Tim stated as he began loading his plate. "It was the perv," Patty disclosed. She got up, made coffee, set the table, and got everything ready to cook. She put it all on when she thought you would be getting up, and then want to get you because the rest of us are starving. Or, who knows, maybe because she just wanted to see you naked. Jeannie blushed again, and then, realizing that the harassment would continue until she fought back, she got up, walked over to the counter where Tim was piling his plate with hot food, slapped him on the butt, grinned up at him, and said, "Nice butt, big boy." Tim feigned disgust. "A piece of meat. That's all I am to you. Just a piece of beefcake." "Well, I'll have you know, missy, I have a headway up here with eyes and all, and henceforth, I expect to see you looking up here and not ogling my body all the time." Their audience roared. Jeannie popped him on the butt again and sashayed back toward the table. "Quit eyeing my butt, you pig. If I can't look, neither can you." Mimicking his kids, Randy said, "You, get a room." The audience roared again. Jeannie shook her perfect hips at Tim and sat down. Tim walked to his chair, which was next to hers, pulled it out, poked her on the shoulder, and shook his butt in her face when she turned toward him. He sat down and started eating with a straight face. "You two are hilarious. You must really know each other well to be able to pull each other's chains like that," Jennifer announced, laughingly. Tim was pleased to see her with some spunk this morning, and to see Randy gazing fondly at her when she teased and talked. Looks like somebody was going to get their happy ending. Too bad his marriage wasn't. Conversation was light and easy throughout their meal and the second pot of coffee that followed. Before they started cleaning the table, Jeannie announced, "My parents and my older sister Kathy are coming up this morning. They want to meet everyone, and then we're going shopping. They should be here soon. Can you guys all stay until they arrive?" "We will be. We're waiting for the repairman to fix all the damage," Patty answered. Tim nodded, and the Jacksons agreed after looking at one another for consent. A nice nonverbal conversation, like a married couple should have. Alan looked at his watch. "I need to leave soon." Jeannie touched his arm and pleaded, "Please stay, Alan. I want you to meet my big sister. She's lonely after her divorce last year. You're lonely, and I think." "Set up," Tim called, and everyone laughed again. Alan smiled, shook his head, and told Jeannie, "If she looks anything like you, I will definitely." "Well, she's bigger than me and a lot prettier, but she's a little bit salty about men since her husband ran off with his secretary." "Ah, so we share a common story. I guess I've been a bit of an a-hole toward women a few times since." "Well, this should be entertaining," Jimmy predicted with a snort. "Wait, if she's divorced and better looking than you, how about you set her up with me? I'm all but divorced. I mean, my wife's buddies have been trying to kill me for weeks. Surely her story isn't worse than mine. We might be perfect for each other." Tim cajoled with a straight face. Jeannie narrowed her green eyes and cut them to Tim, giving him a look that could maim. "You are not a free man, and may never be." "Alan is." "May never be?" Tim inquired. "How's that? I filed for divorce. My attorneys say it's a slam dunk, so I should be free within a few weeks." The crowd around the table was stifling laughter again. Getting into the spirit, Jeannie tossed her hair back and stuck her nose up in the air, appearing aloof. She looked down her nose at him and said, "Remember the girl in the blue dress who turned down the tempting offers of two sexy eligible bachelors to sit in a hospital room with you? You made promises to her that you haven't kept, so you are not yet free. After she tries you out and throws you back, Maybe then you will get introduced to my sister, if Alan hasn't already scooped her up." The audience of 5 roared in appreciation, and Tim hung his head in apparent resignation. "After tonight, I'm going to save the local cops and all you guys a lot of expense and danger because I'm going home. Well, actually, to my ranch back home. I have a nice cabin out there, concrete slab, rock facing over cinder block, metal roof, on top of a hill." Alan tried to object, but Tim continued, "It's a mile to the county road, and there are 2 locked gates between there and the cabin. I'll pick up one of my brother's trained German shepherds as a guard. I'll be loaded and prepared for battle, and I'll be far enough away from anyone else that there won't be any collateral damage. As long as I'm alive, or until these jackasses aren't, everyone around me, my wife and kids, even her parents, are in danger. I refuse to continue endangering everyone else. This is my battle." "You promised you would do your PT, Tim. That was a condition of getting out, and if you don't, you won't ever regain full use of your arm or leg. Please, stay here with us. The lawmen will guard us now. We'll be safe," Jeannie begged. He turned his chair to Jeannie, took her hands in his, and continued. "PT is available down there too. I've used it before. The therapist is a good one, and a good friend. Besides, they gave me a sheet with every exercise drawn up, and I've been doing them long enough to know how. I've thought this through carefully, Jeannie, and discussed it with someone I trust. Last night proved they won't quit trying, regardless of how well protected we think we are. Some policemen might get hurt, my family might get hurt, my friends might get hurt, you might get hurt, and those injuries would be because of me. I can't live with that. Down there I have family and friends who are woodsmen. Some are military vets, others are seasoned, semi-professional hunters, and all are crack shots. Everyone knows me, and strangers are unusual enough that they are noticed and chronicled. Once my story is told, there will be about 4,000 people looking out for me and looking for the 5 a-holes. Trust me, we will all be safer when I'm down there. That doesn't mean, however, that all of you will be completely safe. Your a-hole ex still wants you dead, or at least beat to hell, and when I disappear they may decide to take one of my friends to try to learn where I've gone. Randy and Jennifer are both still in danger because of the crooked sheriff. Furthermore, the more I learn, the more I'm convinced there are people with a lot of power involved that we don't know about. Karen is going to be questioned by 2 Texas Rangers and a senior state trooper from the Criminal Investigations Division about anyone she may have seen or heard about. The same law enforcement officers are going to interview other people who may have information, including members of the Williamson County Sheriff's Department, and I'm going to watch some movies while I'm self-quarantined that may provide more information. I'll be in contact with Ranger Boyd by phone and radio, and we will keep each other well informed. We need to end this thing, and we need to do it soon. I don't like being a sitting target, much less making a target of others, like the people at this table. This is for the best. And before you ask, yes, I will be well armed, and I will be well guarded. They won't be sitting in a marked patrol car, but, believe me, they will be alert and deadly." Jeannie started to protest again, but Randy cut her off. "He's right. We can't protect him in an urban setting nearly as well as they can in a rural. He and the Rangers came up with this plan, and I consider it the best route. If he stays here and we don't catch them, sooner or later they will ambush him successfully. Down there he is with his people in a setting he knows best, and I happen to know he's got some good friends who will do anything for him because, well, they owe him, and they love him too. It's not 100% foolproof, but it's much safer than staying here as a sitting duck." Jeannie looked skeptical and disappointed, and she wanted to argue, but the doorbell rang. She hopped up. "Oh no, it's my family. Go get ready. We will invite them in, introduce ourselves, and entertain them while you do," Patty said. Jeannie ran back to her bedroom. The group met them at the open door, which the workmen had removed and were replacing. The Hildebrands were an attractive 40-something couple, accompanied by a built-like-a-brick shithouse red-haired woman in her 20s. You could see Jeannie at 48 and her mom, Amelia, who was 5 feet 4 inches, beautiful and built, with a charming demeanor. Daddy Joe was over 6 foot tall and slender, with short hair and the erect posture of a military man. Sister Kathy was simply Jeannie and Mom on steroids, 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7 inches, bustier, with red hair rather than blonde, but with the same pretty face and curvy body. Amelia and Kathy were wearing designer jeans and sweaters. Joe was wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt. Jeannie's absence was explained and introductions were made by Jimmy, with Tim being introduced last. The common countenance of her family during the introductions was open and convivial, as a Texan would expect from San Antonio natives. When Tim was introduced, however, those warm greetings turned to hugs, kisses on the cheek, and thanks for saving their daughter. along with a careful visual evaluation. He responded by deflecting credit, saying, "All I did. No, all we did," pointing at Jimmy, Alan, and Patty, was support Jeannie in breaking away from and dealing with her abusive husband. "She is the courageous one." Mom eyed him speculatively and stated unequivocally that Jeannie had told them a very different story and they believed their daughter. She grinned, pulled his big arm up against her, gave him another kiss on one cheek, patted his other cheek, and turned back to the group to thank each verbally. Noticing that Jeannie was nowhere in sight, she teasingly asked, with a big smile, "So our youngest daughter isn't ready yet? How unusual, right?" Her husband and daughter laughed. The others looked puzzled. Sister Kathy noticed our questioning expressions and explained, "You seem confused. Jeannie was always the most fashionably dressed and impeccably groomed person anywhere she went, and she was always late. I swear, she even looked flawless playing volleyball, running track, and cheerleading, but every date had to wait for 15 minutes for her grand entry. We called her Princess Jeannie. Is that not the way she is now?" Patty looked at the others and then answered, "No, I haven't seen that at all. Far from it. She dresses casually, wears little makeup, and is always ready when we are. The reason she isn't ready now is that we ate a late breakfast and talked a little too long. Tim, you work with her. What do you think? She's about the most down-to-earth, self-effacing, kind, and caring woman I know." Tim replied with a touch of defensiveness. "I've seen her dressed up, so I know how stunning she can be, but that was once in nearly 2 years. The remainder of the time I've known her, she's been well but casually dressed, worn only a little makeup, kept an attractive hairstyle appropriate for a teacher who is also the dance team coach, and has been pleasant toward everyone. She's been more all-American girl than princess when I've been around." Her sister looked incredulous. Mom looked like she thought Jeannie had conned him, and Dad beamed with pride. "See, I told you she had grown out of it." "Oh, Dad, she's always been your little princess," Kathy exclaimed with a hint of jealousy. "Speaking of," Alan said, with a glance to the hallway. Jeannie looked delighted to see her family. She was wearing a 3/4 sleeve navy jumpsuit that zipped up the front and comfortable athletics shoes. Her hair was clean and neat, and the only jewelry was a simple heart necklace with matching earrings. Admittedly, the jumpsuit highlighted her curvy body, the hairstyle framed her gorgeous face, and the light makeup made her pretty emerald green eyes look even bigger, but she looked less like Daddy's spoiled princess than her sister or mother. The three women excitedly hugged, kissed, and exchanged compliments, and then Jeannie broke away and went to her dad, who looked ecstatic to see and hold her. Definitely Daddy's girl, Tim thought. Perhaps she did get favorable treatment and a lot of positive reinforcement growing up. He smiled at their joy and marveled at her amazing body and round, but as she stood on tiptoe hugging Daddy. While they were hugging, Patty told Mom Hildebrand that they would be expecting them for supper, offering that Jimmy and Tim would be grilling steak, shrimp, and a variety of vegetables, followed by her famous Texas chocolate sheet cake with chocolate pecan icing. Mom assured her they would return for the feast and asked what time. Patty said whenever. Just let them know so they could be ready. Jeannie turned back to the rest of them. She told Patty and Jimmy they would be back by 4:30, told the Jacksons she enjoyed meeting them and hoped to see them again, and asked Alan if he would be able to go with them and show them some of the new and out-of-the-way stores he had told her about. Even though they had talked about this, Alan blushed. Kathy grinned at her baby sister and shook her head, knowing full well this was a setup, but liking Alan's good looks and personality enough to go along with it. Jeannie enthusiastically led her family and Alan toward the car, before remembering she had left her purse inside and running back to the door. She stepped inside, grabbed her purse off the chair by the door, and gave Tim a smoldering look. "You better be here when I get back, or I'll track you down, mister," she threatened, before cupping his cheek and giving him a soft promise of a kiss. With that, she giggled and ran back to the car. He took some good-natured ribbing from Jennifer and Randy about their friendship, but their attorneys just held their hands over their eyes as if they hadn't seen anything. The Jacksons had to leave, but promised to keep in touch. They signaled Tim to come outside, where Randy put his arm around Tim's shoulders and Jennifer wrapped her arms around his waist. "We both want to thank you for the good advice you gave us yesterday," Randy began. "I got an inkling of how you must feel, and I'll admit that I was crushed to the point of madness. But after I listened to my little West Texas girl, I realized she didn't have the knowledge and experience to beat the sheriff, and also that I need to better equip her. She's too gorgeous for her own good, so she will always attract men, including bad men who will try to use her. We're going to work on that, and we want to keep you in our lives. In a single day, you've become a guy I trust and rely on, and Jennifer feels the same." Jennifer hugged him tightly enough that pain radiated from his wounded hip, but he ignored it and hugged her back. "Thank you, Tim. I was terrified when I heard your name yesterday, but you've turned out to be my best friend in the world, not named Randy Jackson." She relaxed her hold a bit and leaned back to look at him with moist eyes. "There are some observations I feel I should tell you about. I know Karen was blackmailed into making the films, like I was. But, Tim, she wasn't being blackmailed by the time I got involved. It seemed she was almost running the show. She told me she was getting out after this movie, and she was going to spend all her time being the best wife and mommy in the world because she really loves you and your sons. She meant it. I could hear it in her voice. Then the sex would start, and she would become a spicy star. They had to change the script, such as it was, to one where I was being assaulted, because all I could do was cry. I hated those men. I could kill every one of them, and gladly would. Karen, well, she seemed to enjoy the whole thing, but she was kind to me and understanding. She's the only one I wouldn't kill. As I told Randy, the only part one enjoyed was when I was with her. I'm not bi, or at least I've never been before or since, but being with her was, I don't know, thrilling, sensual, maybe. Everyone around her feels it, and I'm sure you do too. I know she meant what she said about going back to being a mother and wife all the time. But can she do it? Can she really give up sex with other people, men and women? I wasn't the only woman, you know, and the men you know about aren't the only men. She supposedly only had about 10 to 12 play days, but she acted like a pro. I see the pain in your eyes, and I'm sorry. I owe my second chance with Randy to you, and I just hate to think of her hurting you again. I know you will make the right decision. Just know you can call us anytime if you need anything, okay? The rest of the day was a blur. There were workmen everywhere. Jimmy and Patty were constantly guiding them through the repairs and changes to be made, including adding deadbolts and expanding the security system to include opening the doors and windows. Tim stayed busy. He split some oak and mesquite for the pits and piled wood in the big fire pit on the patio, but mostly he did his PT while he considered the situation in which he was trapped. When he lit the pit fires at 3:45 to let them burn down, he had reached a number of decisions that he would need to share tonight. Kathy was holding Alan's arm as they walked into the backyard, and they followed her parents to the pit where Tim was preparing to cook the steaks. "Son, Jeannie told us the whole story over lunch. Thank you so much for helping her make and then supporting her decision to leave Larry, and for taking good care of our little girl during her recovery. Sir, your daughter did much more for me and took much better care of me when I was injured than I did for her," Tim demurred. "I am the one who owes her thanks, and I owe her family thanks for raising such a kind and caring person." Jimmy had wandered over from the pit with the grilled veggies, and Mr. Hildebrand asked him, "What really happened last night? We saw the repairmen when we came, and some are still here, but Jeannie was hiding so she doesn't really know. And when we asked Alan, he suggested we ask you. So, what happened?" Jimmy related the events of the previous day, beginning with Tim's release from the hospital, learning the sheriff was involved, plotting with the Rangers and DPS, the failed trap for the bad guys, and ending with the shootout last night. In each segment, Tim was mentioned in a heroic way, and Jeannie's mom and dad began to look at him differently. "You lead an unusually exciting life for a schoolteacher, don't you, Tim?" asked Mom. "Goodness gracious, I've never heard of such doings." "Why do they want to hurt you, young man?" asked her dad. "This makes no sense." Tim coolly replied, "I'll let my attorneys review my month with you, so I don't say something I shouldn't. Jimmy, Alan, you have my permission to disclose as much as you deem fit. I don't want to hide anything from Jeannie's family. My only requests are, tell me how you like your steaks, and then move over there to the patio. I lived it. I don't want to hear it again." Jeannie joined her family on the patio. Jimmy and Alan told the sordid tale while Patty gathered up the needed implements, carried them to the big table on the patio, and listened to the tale, sometimes adding details for the other women. Tim ignored the storytelling in favor of keeping the veggies and steaks cooking properly. For the Hildebrands, the order was medium for Joe, but the three women ordered well done. Tim eyed them steadily and frostily stated, "I'll cook them until they are properly done, then hand you the tongs and you can burn it. I refuse to ruin a prime ribeye by cooking it well done." Joe laughed and said, "See? I've tried to tell you." Kathy rolled her eyes but agreed to taste a properly prepared medium well with the stipulation that she would burn it herself if she wasn't satisfied. Jeannie and Amelia also reluctantly agreed, and Tim returned to the pit. The other three men were medium rare, Patty was medium, so Tim staggered the cooking time accordingly. All the steaks were picked up by their owners at about the same time, after they had the veggies on their plates. Since the Hildebrands were driving back to San Antonio, the beverage of choice was tea, sweet or unsweet, served in a tall glass full of ice. The lack of alcohol didn't keep Kathy from making a face when she cut into her steak. It's all juicy. Tim looked at her with disdain and replied, "Of course it is. Have you ever heard the expression, a big juicy steak? Sure you have, but you've never heard anyone want a big dry steak, have you? Of course not. Try it. If you don't like it, the tongs are hanging on the pit." He then cut his eyes to the genie and her mom, both of whom quickly said, "Okay, I'll try it." Everyone else watched expectantly as each cut her steak and ate the bite, with trepidation. Emilia was the first to respond. Looking surprised, she admitted, "Wow, I had no idea a steak could taste this good. What did you do, Tim?" He smiled in return. "I seasoned it properly with my own special blend of spices, cooked it properly, to medium, and put it on your plate, Emilia." "Medium?" she asked with wide eyes. "Yes, everyone who asked for medium well got medium. Warm pink center, preserving the natural juices, without any blood." "Genie, Kathy, how are your steaks cooked?" "I would have answered, perfectly, if you hadn't told me it was just medium," Kathy replied, seemingly aghast at eating practically raw meat. Tim turned his attention to Jeannie, who gave him a loving smile and answered in her sweetest voice, "It's perfect, Tim. The best I've ever had. Thank you for teaching us something new about steak today." Tim caught the inquiring look Papa Joe gave them both before the subject was changed, and everyone commenced eating again. The conversation remained stimulating throughout the meal, and no one wanted it to end even as the hours passed. It had cooled off outside, so they moved into the living room to continue their conversations. The Hildebrands had brought 2 bottles of fine wine as a gift to their hosts, and decided everyone should have 1 drink before they hit the road back to SA. Tim thanked them, but opened a cold Lone Star Longneck instead, saying that wasting good wine on his unsophisticated palate was just wrong. The first drink was drunk and a second poured when the doorbell rang. Jimmy picked up his new pistol from under the counter by the door. Alan and Tim took stations flanking the door on either side of the hallway. They opened the respective closet doors, stepped partially inside, and raised the rifles hidden therein. Jimmy looked through the peephole, nodded at the other 2 men, and opened the door. Tim glanced back into the living room and saw Mr. Hildebrand watching intently while the women continued chatting. Ranger Jim Boyd entered. He smiled when he saw Alan and Tim in place and Jimmy holding a pistol, but his demeanor changed back to a serious one, and he said he had important news to share with all of them. He was invited to join them in the living room, where conversation had stopped because all were watching the Ranger. After introductions, he paused, looking uncertain as to whether to continue in front of Jeannie's parents. Tim advised him to continue because they had already heard the story and should hear this too. He agreed and delivered news that surprised everyone. "We caught one of the men from last night. The yelp you heard when Tim fired was from a bullet that raked a deep and painful furrow along his ribs, and he sought medical assistance. We were notified by the police. He wasn't one of the men we have been seeking, but we questioned him about where he got the gunshot wound and took him into custody because his story was suspicious. He kept complaining about being in pain, but no one could find his pain pills. He broke and started telling us what had happened, after which, fortunately, the trooper who transported him was able to find the pills in the back seat of his car. Once he got a pain pill, he kept talking until he told us everything he knew." The Ranger looked at Tim and Jeannie, who were sitting together on a love seat, and pointedly asked them, "Are you sure you want me to continue in front of everyone? This is about you too, and it is personal and private." They conferred and affirmed that they wanted everyone to know. So he disclosed that the attack was carried out in an attempt to kill Tim and capture Jeannie. The perpetrators were members of a local street gang who were attempting to collect the bounties that has been placed on them by persons unknown. The bounty for Jeannie specified she had to be taken alive and unharmed, while the bounty on Tim was dead or alive. There was stunned silence in the room. Tim expressed their common shock. "I won't have to make but one guess about who the persons unknown are, but a bounty? Seriously? Have we traveled back in time to 1882? What the hell?" The Ranger gave them a moment to express their outrage, and then warned, "Tim, Jeannie, this changes everything. We need to place you both in protective custody while the manhunt is ongoing. We don't have the manpower to guard you both as you go about your daily lives, and to try to do so is to endanger your lives, the lives of those you are with, and the lives of our officers. Jeannie, you need to take a leave of absence from teaching immediately. You won't be able to resume until this is resolved. Tim, we'll get you the PT you need, but we need to keep you both in a safe house where they can't find you. And we need to do it as soon as possible, like tomorrow. Tim, we're also going to place your wife, kids, and her parents in protective custody because there seems to be a bounty on her capture too. They will be held elsewhere. You two will be moved to a safe location in this area. Tim's brain had been racing, analyzing and problem-solving as the ranger laid out the situation, and he could see that Joe Hildebrand was doing the same thing as he sat ramrod stiff on the edge of his chair, listening intently. Tim saw a mix of incredulity, concern, and fear on the faces of everyone else, excepting Jeannie. She looked angry and focused. Tim turned to Ranger Boyd and began to disclose his plan. Jim, I propose a slightly different plan. You place Jeannie in protective custody and hide her away. Call the sheriff of my home county. Tell him the situation, tell him to keep it to himself, and ask if he has any objection to me taking refuge on the ranch. If he does not, I will leave tomorrow morning and be there in early afternoon. My brother will bring a load of groceries and other needed items out when he comes to feed the cattle. I'll slip in using the back roads, and no one will have any idea I'm there. I'll be safe, Jeannie will be safe, and no one will be risking their lives to guard me. Sooner or later they will kill me unless I do something radical like this. We both know any decent sniper can kill me from too great a distance for my guards to stop, but out there I'm on the high ground, with binoculars, guard dogs, and friendly neighbors. And I'm a pretty damn good marksman myself, if they do find me. He sat back, satisfied he had been persuasive, but Jeannie tore into him. No, that makes no sense. I need to be wherever you are, and we need protection from law enforcement. I know you. You aren't planning to hide out. You're planning to become the bait, lure them in, and kill or be killed. Without thinking, Tim replied, Honey, I understand how you feel, but these guys aren't going to stop. They aren't civilized people playing by civilized rules. They are outlaws who have stopped all efforts to act civilized. Do you think they want you alive and unharmed because Larry wants to apologize to you? Does JW just want to talk to Karen? You and I both know their plans. Are you willing to risk becoming a star in XXX movies and being sold to a rich sheik? If not, you need to accept protective custody and let me do what I need to do down home, on my home turf. Once I hit the brush, I'm as deadly as a rattlesnake. Here in civilization, I'm a sitting duck. I need to go home, you need to go into custody. Then we will both be safer. Before Jeannie could argue, her father interjected, You're both right and wrong. Tim's right that there is no use expecting normal behavior from these guys. They've gone rogue, like a pack of man-eating wolves on the prowl. Trying to save yourself from them is ultimately fruitless. At some point, you have to hunt them down and kill them. I'm sorry, Ranger, but I think you know that's true. The Ranger looked down, looked back up, and said, My official position has been explained and an offer made. Hypothetically speaking, when seemingly normal people begin acting like sociopaths, our normal procedures are rarely effective. Joe Hildebrand again interjected, Tim, I said you were right, but so is Jeannie. If she is with you, the trap is twice baited, and you are both easier to keep alive and safe. You don't know me, but when I heard the ways Jeannie speaks of you, I immediately hired a firm to research you. I know, but if I had done that with Larry, we wouldn't be here in this situation. Anyway, I learned that you are a bit more than the stereotypical college athlete teacher coach father, aren't you? Turning to include the entire group, Joe continued. Los Ratones are of legendary, almost mythical status in the brush country, along the lines of Robin Hood and his merry men. Down there, Tim, you are Robin Hood, righter of wrongs, protector of the people, leader of the Ratones de la Brasada, or Pandilla Tassigillo, as you were originally known. I have no doubt that you can make a single phone call and have a score of sharpshooting brush rats surrounding you in an hour. They owe you. Yes, I read the official report, which somehow failed to tie the disappearance of the reputed drug dealers to the burning of the house, located far out in the country, where they reputedly lived. It found no evidence that anyone had ever lived there, or that the outbuildings, which also burned, ever housed the girls who had recently disappeared. Miraculously, they all suddenly reappeared the next day, but none could remember much about what happened, other that they had been drugged and kept in a dark building for days and days. No bodies were ever found, but the sale of dangerous drugs suddenly stopped, and no more girls disappeared. There had been similar disappearances in 2 adjacent counties, and those counties experienced the same run of unfortunate fires as the result of thunderstorms, and also were fortunate enough to have the girls immediately reappear, albeit with similar drug-induced amnesia. That all that coincided with your return home after the bowl game that year was deemed coincidence by the sheriffs, who admitted they weren't that concerned about the drug dealers suddenly deciding to leave. Joe measured Tim, Ranger Boyd, and his rapt audience, and then proceeded. My wife knows, but my daughters don't, that I served in the Special Forces during the Vietnam conflict. I've seen some stuff and done some stuff that I don't like to talk about, but those experiences tell me that we aren't going to keep Jeannie, Tim, his sons, Karen and her family, perhaps Jennifer and Randy, whomever, safe from these subhuman sociopaths without using some unusual methods. Here is what I propose. Law enforcement will keep Amelia and Kathy, Alan, Jimmy, Patty, and anyone else they identify as endangered, under guard and safe from harm. Jeannie and I will accompany Tim to his ranch to hide out, but we will be well armed and fully prepared to defend ourselves from any intruders with bad intentions. The ranger will be our point of contact. He will apprise everyone affected of the situation as things unfold. If nothing has been resolved within 10 days, we will reconvene and consider other options. Ranger, do you have a comment? I can't condone, in my official capacity, any plan that precludes law enforcement from primary responsibility for the safety of those threatened. It is true that we are somewhat handicapped in operating under the laws and rules from which the suspects are free, but we, as an organization, can't condone anything resembling vigilante actions by civilians. That said, if you tell me the three of you are going to go hide out at a remote ranch until those trying to cause injury to you are captured by law enforcement, I can't and won't tell you not to. Is that clear enough? Tim and Joe looked at each other and both agreed. Joe turned to his family and declared, "In light of what we have learned tonight, I think it is better that we spend the night here, if there is room, or nearby if not. That will give the ranger time to make necessary arrangements. I further propose that, tomorrow night Tim, Jeannie, and I proceed to the ranch under cover of darkness, and the rest of you proceed to the safe house with the ranger. Tim's family will ensure we have the necessary supplies. My firm will ensure we have the necessary protective gear and equipment. We will all check in periodically, through the ranger unless he thinks it is safe to speak directly, but we need to take care that we don't inadvertently disclose anyone's whereabouts. Any objections or improvements you would like to bring forward regarding this proposal?" "Not from me, Captain Hildebrand," Tim replied with a grin. Joe looked puzzled until Tim explained. "What? You don't think you are the only one who researches people of potential importance before meeting them, do you?" Jeannie had been quiet throughout, but now she spoke up. With a twinkle in her eye, she asked, "I suggest that we acquire a vehicle they don't know that is appropriate to the situation we will face in South Texas, and switch out somewhere along the way. Daddy, do you perhaps have a vehicle like that somewhere in your inventory, or at one of the dealerships?" Dad beamed at her, told her that was a great idea, and allowed that he did have something available. Tim intervened in their conversation by telling them, "I've got the ranch covered. I have the perfect vehicle for getting around on the ranch, on roads, or in brush. We need something that can keep us ahead in a high-speed pursuit and still drive on dirt roads. It would be great if you've got that." Joe smiled and nodded. "I've got that covered." Being one bedroom short was resolved by assigning Kathy to share Jeannie's room. Kathy smiled, winked at Alan, and said, "Okay, but Jeannie better not snore. I'll be there in a few, baby sis." Jeannie replied, "We all know who snores, older sister, and it isn't me." After goodbyes and good nights, everyone but Alan and Kathy adjourned to their rooms. As Jeannie and Tim walked down the hall to their rooms, Tim whispered that if Kathy snored or was a bed hog that kept Princess Jeannie awake, Kathy could move to Tim's room. That got him a hard elbow to the ribs, luckily on his uninjured side, and a warning that would never happen. Tim turned the coffee maker on as soon as he awoke, and found Mr. Hildebrand dressed, sitting on the veranda reading the Austin American Statesman. He carried a cup of black coffee with a spoonful of sugar out to him, and acknowledged that Jeannie told him how he took it. The paper refolded and laid on the table. They enjoyed the brilliant sunrise without speaking. "How will you let sus hermanos know?" Hildebrand asked after several minutes had passed in silence. "I won't, a friend will," Tim answered. "It is the tightest phone tree in history, as each person only has one number to call, and no names. But by dark, every Raton will know where and when to rendezvous. Is Monday night at 9 too soon for you?" "No, that's perfect," the captain replied. "We can fill in the details on the way down tonight, scout the area tomorrow, and get set up. I don't know how your stalkers are going to find out where we're going, but if we can make it 2 days before they appear, the trap will be more secure." "I don't know if we can guarantee 2 days. That is another trap. Jim, Boyd, the ranger, won't disclose anything about us or send the others to the safe houses until sometime Monday. If, as he suspects, there is a leak within law enforcement, they will know then. How long it will take them to get to the ranch, or how soon they will send a squad, we can't predict." "They won't send someone," Joe said confidently. "Larry wants to be there when Jeannie is captured, and they all want to watch you die." They heard Jeannie talking to someone in the kitchen, and then she appeared on the veranda with coffee. She was wearing wind pants and a windbreaker, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and without makeup, but she looked entirely yummy to Tim. Her dad also seemed to approve, greeting her cheerily and accepting her kiss on the cheek with a smile. She started to sit down, and then leaned over to give Tim a kiss on the cheek too. "So, did you sleep all right, baby?" Dad asked. "Kathy didn't keep you up with her snoring, did she?" "No, she didn't. I didn't hear a thing," she replied, with a wink at Tim. "She didn't hog the bed either. It was like I was alone." Tim caught the drift and winked back. Dad just smiled. Patty, Jimmy, Kathy, and Alan came outside, and Patty suggested they move to the big table on the patio. "I made us some more coffee," Patty informed everyone. "And I was up early making donuts," Jimmy said with a grin. "Made some apple fritters and bear claws too. They should be ready soon." "I hope you made enough for the policemen who guarded us all night too," Patty declared. "Sure, enough for them and their relief shift, which arrives at 7. Mr. was supposed to deliver them at 6:45. Oops, I guess I let that cat out of the bag." Jimmy laughed. "Yeah, like anyone at this table believed you got up at 4 a.m. to make donuts," Alan teased. "I'm pretty sure we would have smelled that, even if you didn't make any racket." Tim reveled in the easy camaraderie among this group of well-educated and personable adults. He thought for a brief moment of his lovely, charming wife, and how well she would fit it, if only. He brushed his sorrow aside, forced a smile back onto his face, and looked around. No one but Jeannie caught his unguarded moment, and she had a sad look that mirrored the one he had forced away. He smiled and winked again, and she smiled back. The 2 cops that just got off duty ate with him on the patio. The new shift had each been given a half-dozen donuts and donut holes to eat at their stations. Patty had fried up some ham to go with the sweet items, and brought a gallon of milk to the table, acknowledging with a nod to Tim. Someone at this table can't eat breakfast without meat and milk. As it turned out, everyone at the table liked meat and milk with their sweets, and she had to add those to her grocery list. After breakfast, Tim called Ranger Boyd to firm up the plans, and to get assurance Karen's phone was only tapped by law enforcement. At 9 p.m., Karen and family were to be moved to a safe house by Ranger Bird, who was assigned to them, and Boyd would move everyone at the Houseman's. Joe, Jeannie, and Tim would slip away and follow a circuitous route to San Antonio when it got dark, and would leave San Antonio for Tim's ranch precisely at 9 p.m. That would give them a chance to lose any tail, change vehicles, and get clothes for Mr. Hildebrand before heading out. Because both safe houses were also in the country, everyone was advised to wear jeans and boots. Unable to go to her house to get what she needed, Jeannie and family, plus Alan, were escorted to the nearest Western store to buy what they might need, and Tim rode to his house with the other officer on duty to get everything else he needed. After loading his clothes and gear, Tim had the officer drive him to a payphone outside a convenience store/gas station, where he called Karen. The boys were thrilled to get to talk to him, and tried to catch him up on everything that had happened since they saw him in the hospital. Karen finally took the phone away, after their grandmother bribed them with a fruit snack, and Tim went over the plan with her. She seemed both frightened and reluctant, so he asked to speak to her dad. He was stoic about the need to hide, and said they would wait for the ranger to contact them. Karen asked where he would be hiding. He told her he couldn't say, and then asked if there was anything she could remember that could help keep them safe. She thought about it, but couldn't come up with anything. Tim hung up and was taken back to the Houseman's home, where he immediately set about watching more of the videos. As disgusting and disturbing as the videos were, he did learn which high school students were involved in the spicy video shoots, and why one babysitter wouldn't give a deposition. He also identified 2 elected officials they knew nothing about, including a state official, and 2 law enforcement officers appeared in uniform to raid the party, but stayed to participate in the gangbang of Karen and a recent high school graduate Tim knew. He called Jim Boyd and asked him to come over ASAP. The shoppers met back at the Houseman's at 4 p.m., where they discovered that Jimmy had a mess of catfish and hush puppies ready to fry, and Patty had all the trimmings ready. Tim and Jim Boyd remained in the study watching the videos until they were called at 6 to come eat. They looked troubled when they emerged. The 3 attorneys pulled them aside and Jeannie made her way over to them. "What's wrong?" Alan asked. "You guys look disturbed. Let's just say we have a much better idea where our leaks are, why the suspects have been able to elude us, and a deeper understanding of the crimes they've committed," the ranger replied. Tim just shook his head with his eyes closed and said, "I had no idea. I can't believe I worked alongside those guys. Hell, I can't believe some of them are professional educators. No, they are professional predators acting like educators. Do you think we should put the food in the oven and talk, or go ahead and eat first?" Patty queried. "It sounds like we need to rethink our plans." "Let's eat," Jim said with conviction. "And let us ruminate." "Haha, double meaning on the new information a bit before we start changing plans. My first inclination is that we can proceed, but we have a much better idea of how and to whom we should feed information. Anyway, let's eat and then we can discuss. Compartmentalizing, they enjoyed a great meal and even better companionship. I can't believe it, but it seems like we're all old friends, not new acquaintances. Kathy exclaimed after Alan's joke left them roaring with laughter. We will be by the time this is over, being trapped in a safe house for days or weeks together. Patty replied. That put a damper on the relaxed, convivial conversations, bringing them back to the immediate danger in their real world. Ranger Boyd called a war council in the living room, and they reconsidered their plans in light of the new information he shared. When he disclosed the names of the students, Jeannie blanched. When he disclosed the names and positions of the elected officials, her dad grew red-faced, cursed, and threatened ruination under his breath. After Boyd's conversation with the ranger responsible for Tim's sons, Karen, and her family, they were pushing the evacuations back to midnight, and both were going to different safe houses than planned. Tim, Jeannie, and Joe would slip out the back door, go over the fence and west down the alley, where a nondescript sedan would be waiting. They would drive that to Joe's dealership and trade vehicles, and then go by his home to get weapons and proper clothing for the Brush Country Ranch, before heading southwest. Tim called his in-laws home for the second time today. He lovingly spoke with his kids for 20 minutes, and then, reluctantly, with his wife. The more film he watched, the more she disgusted him, but he wanted to give her one more chance to provide information that could keep them all safe. Have you thought of anything else you want to tell me, or your sheriff, or ranger bird? Time is running out. We need to move soon because we are all in mortal danger. Any names, any other information to share? Karen hesitated, but replied in the negative. So, Karen, no other teachers, students, cops, elected officials you can remember that were involved? There has to be someone else with power, someone in law enforcement, someone who is alerting the criminals as to our plans. I know you don't want the kids and your family killed, so what are you holding back? The line was silent for almost a minute before she answered, Let me talk to Ranger Bird. I don't feel comfortable talking to you since I know these phone lines are tapped. Thank you, Tim replied. Take good care of our sons, and do what you were told. I'll talk to you as soon as this is finished. At 11:55 they were on I-35 South in a 1978 Dodge Ramcharger 4x4 with the big block 440 cu-inch motor. It had 4-inch steel pipe bumpers on the front and back, and a winch mounted on the front bumper, was raised about 6, and rode on all-weather tires Joe said were practically puncture-proof. It wasn't a quiet ride with the tires humming and the engine growling, but Joe handled it like he owned it, which he did. They took several maneuvers to find out if they were being followed, but saw no sign of a tail. Joe topped the tank off at the last town before they turned onto the country roads that would take them to their destination. Everyone used the restrooms, and Tim bought 20-ounce cups of coffee because it was already after 1:30 a.m. When they had gone about a mile on the county road, they came to a long curve. There were piles of pavement for a resurfacing job on the wide right-of-way, and Tim had Joe pull in behind them and wait 10 minutes to check again for pursuit, but no one came along, so they proceeded to the ranch. They turned off the pavement and drove the last 2 miles on a sandy county road that needed grading. The entrance to the ranch was near the midway point. They turned in and Tim opened and relocked the 2 gates barring the road to the ranch house. He then slipped off his athletic shoes and climbed on the hood of the Ramcharger in his socks to scan for the lights of anyone following them. Satisfied they were not followed, they drove up the road toward the house. When they crested the first hill, they could see the ranch house on the second, taller hill. The nightlight on the pole by the water tank was on, but no other lights. They stopped in the brush and approached the house from the dark side with rifles and pistols at the ready. Joe jogged back to the SUV while Jeannie and Tim opened the house. They checked the food in the refrigerator and pantry, which were well stocked by Nate, Tim's brother. They also checked the sheets on the bed to make sure they were fresh, and peeled the sheets and blankets back to make sure no stinging scorpions were resting there. Joe parked by the back door. They brought their clothes, weapons, and other equipment inside and set up sleeping arrangements. Jeannie would take the bedroom, which included a full bathroom and dressing area. Tim and Joe would sleep in the bunk beds along the south wall and share a small bathroom with a shower and single sink. Exhausted, they slept well until 8 the next morning. Tim awoke first, used the bathroom, and put on a pot of coffee, which woke Jeannie and her father. They enjoyed Tim's eggs, bacon, and biscuits from Pioneer Mix and discussed their day. Tim had noticed that Jeannie's expression of her feelings toward him was muted in front of her father, but she still gave him little touches and looks when Dad wasn't watching. They dressed for the outdoors with the intention of reconnoitering the area around the house first. and then carefully examined the ways the bad guys might use to access the ranch. Jeannie was intent on examining the house inside and out, and asked dozens of questions about the old furnishings, much of which he explained came from his grandparents and great-grandparents. Joe asked if the ranch was really his, or if it belonged to his grandparents or parents. To satisfy both Jeannie and her dad, Tim gave a thorough explanation. This was his paternal grandparents' getaway before they, and the maternal grandparents, decided to divide their estates among their heirs. That decision came based on personal experiences with the legal and taxation system when their parents died, and upon the advice of their common attorney. Both families were land poor, meaning they owned lots of pasture and farmland that produced modest to no income most years, but the government treated it like it held gold mines when appraising it. By giving the land to their heirs in smaller increments, they avoided the taxation that would force the heirs to sell their inheritances to pay the taxes. Only a money-hungry, out-of-control government could not see the irony in that, but his grandparents did, and started deeding property to their son and daughter, and their grandkids, before they reached 60. The ranch was Tim's inheritance, deeded to him in 125-acre increments over a 6-year period by his beloved paternal grandparents. They gifted him the maximum allowable each year, and he paid for the rest out of revenue from cattle sales, even though most of the cattle belonged to them. The 4 grandparents had decided to keep the land in chunks large enough to raise cattle, so his brother and sister received similar bequests from the maternal grandparents, with the understanding that all inheritances for the grandkids were from both families. Brother Nathaniel, Nate, got the land closest to town. It was only 400 acres, but much of that was improved pasture and farmland, and it had a nice family house on it. He and his high school sweetheart and now wife, Linda, loved the rolling hills, the fertile farmland, and the big 2-story 4-bedroom house, and intended to fill with children. Sister Janice, Jan, opted for a 500-acre ranch about 10 miles out of town on the Nueces River because it had irrigation rights, an irrigation system in place, and fertile fields. Her husband, Gary, already owned a large cattle and horse ranch in nearby Dimmitt County. They lived there, but raised irrigated and fertilized hay for his prize quarter horses on the river place. Tim, their youngest grandkid, wanted and received title to the most remote and least developed ranch while he was still in high school. He talked his friends into doing a lot of work on the 800 ranch in return for hunting, fishing, and camping privileges, and Tim spent much of his spare time making small improvements. He had taught himself to operate a front loader and backhoe, a small Caterpillar bulldozer, and how to plow, disc, and shred with the ranch tractor. The other equipment he was loaned by neighbors in exchange for work on their ranches, and all gave him lessons before he started using the equipment. Tim and his friends were well liked by all the neighbors because they were always willing to help with roundups and ranch work for low wages and good food. But he was particularly close to the lonely and crippled-up old man who had the land to the east, across the county lane. Mr. Thurman had never married and had no close family, so he called on Tim quite frequently. The Caterpillar bulldozer was his, and he had Tim clear senderos, improve the tank dump, and push brush back off the roads on his land before he turned Tim loose on his own land without supervision. Driving a cat was an entirely new experience, alien even in comparison to his tractor work. What with it being a tracked vehicle with myriad levers, joysticks, and pedals for different purposes, but he mastered it quickly under Mr. Thurman's tutelage. Land in this area had been in the families for generations, so it was hard to acquire more. Tim asked all his neighbors to give him the first chance if they wanted to sell adjacent land, and 2 years later Mr. Thurman took him up on the offer. He owned 320 acres with a great tank on a big creek and a small 1-bedroom house. He had cancer and knew he wasn't going to live much longer. He didn't want to die alone, so he decided he would go into a nursing home that had hospice for his last days. His asking price was far too low, and Tim told him that. He refused Tim's more generous offer, saying he would just have to leave it for Tim in his will anyway. He asked instead that Tim and his friends act as his pallbearers and say a few words over him before interment. Tim bought the land with the college money he did not need due to his football scholarship. He paid cash for the land and got a nice discount for paying the legal services, fees, and title insurance in cash. The land cost Tim a little over $50 per acre, plus service as a pallbearer and a testimonial speaker, but in the will he also received the Caterpillar, a pickup, a tractor, and more money than he had actually paid for the land. When his tale was told, they walked the edge of the cleared area to check for anything a stalker could use of cover in a firefight. The 7-acre clearing included a well, a small pump shed, a concrete water storage trough, a small cattle trap made with 2-inch pipe, and a cattle dipping vat, which was left over from the days in which screwworms killed so many cows, calves, and bulls. It was fenced off now, but water stood in it after rains, and Tim had seen to it that pesticide was periodically poured in it to kill mosquito larvae in the stagnant water. They decided in case of an attack, one sharpshooter had to defend the open spaces around that cluster of protuberances so they couldn't be used for cover in order to fire on the house. Fortunately, the house was on the crest of the hill, and the foundation was poured so that the house stood a foot above the land. Anyone firing on it would be firing uphill, and the trajectory of the bullets would be upward, more likely to hit the ceiling than someone hunkered lower in the house. They walked back to the house, determining the fields of fire they could control from the limited number of windows in the house should they be attacked while inside. Joe spent half an hour examining the walls and windows. The walls were concrete block, with 8-inch of stacked stone veneer, and Joe pronounced them impenetrable by commercially available ordnance. He also praised the lack of windows on the west side, other than the small 2-foot x 2 window in the bathroom, which jutted out from the main house. People in South Texas rarely put windows on the west side because the hot sun overheated the rooms if they did. There were also 18-inch by 4-foot horizontal sliding windows located high on the south wall that let light into the bedroom and en-suite bath, but limited the heat of the sun warming the house. Shots fired through them would harmless hit the top of the interior walls, which were also concrete block. The north wall, which included the chimney for the fireplace, had only one window. It was a 3-foot by 3-foot window over the sink. That posed some danger, but that window is at least 5 foot above the floor, and they would be shooting from a lower position because the elevation on the hillside fell off quickly. The one concern Joe had was the windows on the east side, where the screened porch was located. The 3-foot by 3-foot windows on that side were only 3 foot above the floor, so shots fired through them would be deadly to anyone standing or sitting on something. Because the county road was to the east and both entrances to the ranch came from that road, they would need to ensure that direction was well controlled. With defensive positions decided, they loaded into Joe's truck and drove down to the mesquite pens where cattle were driven during branding and shipping. It was located on the southeast corner of the ranch. The ranch hand and his family lived in a wooden house near the well, just southeast of the pens and barns. Daniel and Dora had worked for the family for years, and their kids were friends of and went to school with Tim and his siblings. Their kids were grown and lived elsewhere now, but the Mendez were considered family. Joe and Jeannie were fascinated by the stacked mesquite pins and shipping chutes, and by the palm arbor beside the pins that provided shade for the large table and benches. There were 2 barbecue pits nearby, and an old chuck wagon was kept under a tin roof beside the bigger barn. Tim gave them a quick tour and history, and led them to the barn. After examining the chuck wagon and hearing how food was served from it during spring roundup and branding, Tim pulled the 10-foot by 10-foot barn doors open to reveal a vehicle under a tarp. With a flourish, Tim removed the tarp to reveal his pride and joy, a well-maintained 1948 Dodge Power Wagon WDX quad cab. The color of the paint was battleship gray, and the interior was likewise gray. Raised 6 inches and mounted on all-terrain tires for the 4-wheel drive. Powered by a 3.9-liter Cummins diesel engine, the classic Power Wagon looked fierce and ready for battle. Tim invited them to open the 4 doors and look at the impeccable condition of the upholstery and the interior, which he could afford to have done after he acquired Mr. Thurman's land at such little cost. Jeannie was all but speechless. Her dad, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking about what he deemed this amazing truck, as he pointed out feature after feature. He told Tim he wouldn't even know how to price this vehicles if he were to try to sell, reckoning it to be priceless. When Tim pointed out that it had less than 20,000 miles, he shook his head and said, "Priceless? This is a one-of-a-kind. You take good care of it and never sell it, because someday it will be worth more than a 3-bedroom brick house." Jeannie, still in a state of wonder, put her arm around Tim's waist, looked up at him, and said, "Honey, can we take it for a ride?" Tim quickly looked at her dad, who was eyeballing him coolly at her use of honey. Jeannie caught herself and quickly turned to her dad, stammering, I don't know why I called him that, Dad. I wasn't thinking and it just slipped out." Dad's frown deepened and then wavered before giving in to laughter. When he recovered a little, he faced the frowning Jeannie and explained, "I was going to see how long you two could keep up the 'we're just colleagues' routine, but the look on your faces when you slipped up." He laughed some more and then asked, "Do you really think we're that clueless?" The look on your face and the timbre of your voice was a dead giveaway the first time you brought him up, and that was nearly 2 years ago. Remember your mom giving you advice about keeping men friends as friends? That look got more dreamy-eyed after he saved you from your husband. Now, well, let's just say your mom, sister, and I had a conversation coming up to Austin in which we agreed to let you two carry on your act. Yes, I know your attorneys say you need to wait until you are both divorced to show affection, but I'd say your spouses already divorced you when they did what they did. Besides, honey, There is no one here but us, and you ain't fooling me anyway, so just relax. No, I don't want to see you two making out right in front of me or sleeping together, but calling Tim honey isn't a problem. With disclosure out of the way, he wrapped Jeannie in his arms, smiled down at her, and kissed her forehead. She beamed. Joe beamed at Tim, whose look of concern had morphed into relief, and extended his hand. Tim took it and was pulled into his embrace with Jeannie, sandwiching her. She purred, "My two favorite men in the whole world holding me at the same time. I think we should stay right here." After a moment, Dad released her and told them, "We still have work to do to get ready, but first I want to see what's in the rest of this barn and in the other two buildings. After that, I want to take the monster wagon for a ride." Jeannie kept her arm around him when he tried to pull away, so he took them over to look at the tractor and then opened the tack room. The tack room had a built-up wooden floor that was 2 steps above the dirt floor of the barn. There were a dozen custom saddles sitting on wooden horses, with saddle blankets hanging on a rope stretched across the room, and reins were hanging on hooks. There were 4 branding irons hanging on nails, as well as several sacks of plastic ear tags in various colors, and a couple of applicators, sitting on a wooden bench. Jeannie was fascinated by the saddles and was examining each carefully. Joe asked, "I see a can of kerosene, and one marked burnt oil. What are those used for?" "The burnt oil is smeared on the calf after it's branded to seal the brand and help it heal," Tim explained. "We use kerosene for a lot of things, including to start fires, for lanterns and torches, and to apply to stinging scorpion and wasp bites to make them stop hurting. Dad is the only wholesaler who still carries it, but a lot of old ranchers buy 5 gallons at a time because it has so many uses." Jeannie was bent over examining another saddle, her luscious but filing her jeans and distracting Tim, when she asked, "Tim, there is a symbol under each of the strap holders. What does that mean?" "That's the symbol the saddle maker uses. Trey Hayward is the best one around, and that's the way you can tell it's one of his saddles and not a rip-off. Pretty intricate, isn't it?" She nodded and asked, "Which one is yours?" "2 of his and 1 other," Tim replied, pointing to 3 sitting side by side. 2 were identical except for size. "That is my saddle as a child, the larger one I got when I turned 14. I'm saving the youth saddle for my children, of course. See the saddle by the wall that looks like mine, but has silver on the saddle horn? That's my grandfather's. This one is my grandmother's. These are Mom and Dad's. These are Daniel and Dora's, and the rest of Trey's saddles belong to the ranch. Anyone can use them, but normally it is my friends or people we hire to work cattle. You know, cowpunchers or cowboys if you must. But what about this one, with all the designs and all-around cowboy on it?" "Whose is it?" Jeannie asked. "It's mine. I won it in high school. Only rodeo I ever entered. I enjoy watching rodeos, but I never could see the sense in some of the events. I get calf roping, bronc riding, and team roping. We do those on the ranch from time to time, although we try not to buy or raise horses that buck. But why would a man dive off a running horse onto a running steer? And why would a man climb on a bull? Never got that." Jeannie had moved on and was examining 2 other saddles. "Can I use one of these?" Jeannie asked excitedly, walking over and pointing at 2 rarely used and very ornate saddles with smaller seats and short stirrups that were obviously made for a woman. "Honey," he answered with a grin, "you can use any saddle you want. I'm pretty sure that, after they meet you, my mother and grandmother will let you use theirs." "Oh, these are your mom and grandmother's saddles. Maybe I should wait." Tim was reassuring her it would be all right when they walked out of the barn and saw Daniel washing up outside their house, and Dora walking toward them with her arms extended. "Tomedio," she shouted excitedly. "We saw the truck up on the hill this morning, so we knew you were here. Come, introduce us to your friends and come eat. I made all your favorites." Tim's face lit up. He walked quickly to meet her and took her in an embrace, picking her up and twirling her around. Daniel walked quickly over sporting a big smile and clasped Tim on the back. Tim hugged him in return and called him Tio Daniel, which he pronounced Don Yll. "Theodora, Tio Daniel, this is Jeannie and her dad, Joe Hildebrand." When they finished exchanging handshakes, greetings, and hugs, Tim explained, "They are here to help me with a problem, and I'll need your help too. But first, let's eat. Tortillas de harina, carne guisada, frijoles, y arroz mexicano. Está bien, Teo? Está muy bien, tia?" Tim answered delightedly. Dora laughed, replied, "Bueno, comemos," and put her arm around him as they walked to their house. "Dang, Mijo, where you been so long? We missed you," Daniel exclaimed. Tim hugged him too and replied, "It has been way too long. I won't make that mistake again." The conversation over the most delicious food I've ever eaten, according to both Jeannie and Joe, was cordial and informative, as Tia and Tio brought them up to speed on the cattle, the planting of spring crops, and events that had occurred and those planned around the area. Finally, Daniel asked, "What is the problem we can help you with, Teo?" Tim began a brief explanation, but Dora would not allow the brevity, demanding more information. She snorted her disapproval when told of Karen's actions that precipitated the current problems, and cursed in Spanish when told about the gunshot wounds from the first attempt to kill Tim. "So that's why you were walking funny and flinch when I hug you. Where were you hit?" Tim showed her the wounds, and she cursed again, colorfully describing the parentage and fate of the Pendejos who shot her Medio. Daniel was a World War II veteran, and his stoic features turned ever angrier as the story continued. "So, Teo, have you told Los Ratones?" Tim advised him that he had not, because they wanted to look over the situation before meeting. Daniel shook his head in disagreement. "No, mijo, necesitas decirlo, hermanos ahora. You can use our telefono." Tim looked at Joe, who said, "We're pretty much ready, Tim. After we ride the roads, we will know what we need to know. And then it's just a matter of setting things up, letting the word out, and getting your people placed before they arrive." Tim walked to the phone and called Wildman at his office in New Braunfels. He answered on the second ring, and Tim said, "¿Qué pasó, Vado? ¿Está bien? Bueno, bueno. Hey, on gran fiesta a la hacienda de los Mendez hasta mañana por la noche. ¿Puedes venir?" Will paused and then replied, "De veras? Sí, ciertamente. Digo mis primos. ¿A qué hora?" "A las 7 más o menos. Sí, está bien invita todos," Tim replied. "Bueno, hermano. Hasta mañana." Will answered before hanging up. The die is cast, Tim thought as he returned to the others. God help us all. Jeannie gave Tim a puzzled look, and then stated in an inquisitive way, "You speak Spanish?" "Sure, pretty much everyone down here is bilingual. Or rather trilingual, because our primary language is Tex-Mex," he replied with a grin. "They made us take 2 foreign languages in high school." Teodora agreed. "Without Temidio's help, my son would have failed Spanish and not graduated. I don't know where they speak that kind of Spanish, but it's not in Texas or Mexico." Daniel asked if the fiesta would be in the implement shed and corral again. Tim said it would, and Dora told Jeannie she would appreciate some help stringing the lights and decorations up and getting things ready. Jeannie quickly agreed, and Dora asked if it would be all right to start tomorrow morning about 8:30 if she made breakfast. They agreed enthusiastically. Her cooking was unbelievably good. Tim and Daniel decided the cattle needed to be divided between the Thurman pasture on the east and the back quarter on the west. Tim asked who wanted to help round up and herd cattle this afternoon, and was happy that Jeannie volunteered before the 2 men could respond. She had never mentioned being a cowgirl, or even a rider, but she was surprising him daily, so why not? Daniel said he would have the horses at the barn in an hour. Tim unhooked the trickle charger, and the old power wagon fired right up. Jeannie and Dad climbed in front with him, and they rode the ranch roads for the hour, looking for both danger and places to set traps for intruders. When the cattle were isolated on the 320-acre Thurman pasture and the 160-acre western quarter section, the Ratones could set up firing stations, traps, and booby traps at will, without concern about livestock getting hurt. Back at the barn, Tim insisted that everyone wear chaps, a brush jacket, and a hat. Jeannie looked discomfited by the getup, but Tim thought she looked adorable. She picked a saddle blanket, reins, and Tim's grandmother's saddle, and then squealed with delight when Daniel offered her the shiny black mare with a wild star on her forehead, creatively called the Black Mare. Tim helped her saddle her mount, and then saddled his favorite mare, Blue. The blue roan was glad to see him, nuzzling his face and nickering in greeting. He slipped her a handful of sweet feed and rubbed her neck before putting the bridle on and saddling her. After making sure he was an expert rider, Daniel mounted Joe on a red quarter horse that was a great cutting horse, and he took the big black stallion, because he needs to be ridden. He's getting Hosco, which Tim explained means surly. They rode a big loop around the herd of nearly 100 red Santa Gertrudis cattle, spaced themselves with Daniel on point, Jeannie riding swing on the right side, Joe riding right flank, and Tim riding left flank/swing. The cattle were tame, and the longhorn steer that acted as lead caught on right away, following the point as he had been trained to do. The ride was uneventful, but Jeannie and Joe quickly learned why you wear chaps and brush jackets. As they pushed the cattle over the hill where the ranch house was located, Tim looked back and saw his brother's pickup turning onto the ranch road. By the time they pushed the cattle through the gap to the back quarter and wired it back up, the pickup was parked on the tank dump behind them, and Nate was sitting on the tailgate. Daniel closed the gate when he rode back out, and they made their way back to Nate's pickup. "¿Quieres una cerveza fría?" Nate queried, and opened the lid of the ice chest. Everyone said they did, and Nate pulled out and opened 4 long necks. Nodding to Joe and Jeannie, he offered, "Sorry, y'all. All I've got is Lone Star Red because that's all baby brother and Daniel will drink." He climbed off the tailgate, took off his hat, introduced himself to Jeannie and then to Joe, put his hat back on, and handed out the ice-cold long necks. "So, Miss Jeannie, are you a cowgirl by trade?" Nate inquired. She took a long draw of the cold beer, grinned, and replied, "Actually, this is my first roundup, but you already knew that, because I can tell you're teasing me, like your baby brother does." Nate cocked his head and observed, "You were doing right well, as far as I could tell. You might want to keep a little more weight on your stirrups, or your cute little bottom is going to be sore tomorrow." Joe grinned. Tim and Daniel guffawed, and Jeannie, with little more than a light blush, cocked her head and eyeballed Nate before replying, "I can tell you really are Tim's brother. The first thing you notice when you drive up is my cute little bottom." And then she brightly said, "Thanks for the advice. I wouldn't want that." Nate broke up at her response and then countered, "Sorry, Miss Jeannie. I didn't think Tim would bring someone without a sense of humor and a lot of self-confidence down to this godforsaken brush pile to face his ill-bred family and friends, but I just had to check. Even with all your cowgirl duds on, you look awfully put together for down here." Jeannie joined the others on the ground, faced away from them, bent over and asked Tim and Nate, "Is my cute little bottom still okay? Did I hurt it?" Daniel and Joe bent over in laughter. With Jeannie's super prime derriere outlined by the leather chaps, Nate and Time were savoring the sight and grinning from ear to ear. "What do you think, bro? Looks all right to me. How about you?" Tim queried. Nate crooked his head, frowned, and said, "Hard to tell from here. How about you come over here and let us examine it a little closer, Miss Jeannie?" She backed up a couple of steps toward them, stopping just out of hand range, and watched over her shoulder. The brothers leaned over and peered intently. Finally, Nate opined, "Yep, I'd say your bottom is in prime, tip-top, excellent shape, in spite of the bouncing, Miss Jeannie." She wiggled her butt and asked, "Tim, is that your opinion too?" "Well, it may be better than that, but yes, my opinion is that your bottom remains flawless, regardless of the jostling." But, he qualified as his hand reached out toward her bottom, "I'd have to examine it physically before I could offer an unqualified opinion." Jeannie stepped away from his hand, waggled her fingers at him, and warned, "No touching my bottom. It's sore." Then she giggled, took a long drink of her beer, winked at both brothers, and wiggled back to pet her horse. "She got y'all good. Finally met your match, didn't you?" the normally impassive Daniel proclaimed, and the brothers sheepishly agreed. Joe laughed at his daughter's antics and wondered where that part of her personality had been for so long. The conversation grew serious when Nate asked Tim, "So I hear there's a party tomorrow night down at Daniel and Dora's, and the missus and I are invited. Want to tell me what we're celebrating?" "Nate, you don't have to get involved. You guys are expecting and I don't." Nate interrupted. "Didn't you hear my question? What are we celebrating? Linda and I will decide if we want to come after I hear, and we discuss the answer." Tim hemmed and hawed a bit before Joe and Jeannie stepped up and told him the sordid tale. Tim sat quietly and drank his new beer while they explained, and Nate asked more questions. When they finished, he clasped him on his right shoulder and exclaimed, "Damn, bro. I'd have never dreamed Karen would get involved in something like that. You seem better than I'd have expected, and a hell of a lot better than I'd be if Linda did something like that." "Are you?" Tim looked down, then at Jeannie, and replied, "I've had a lot of support from my friends, and enough time to process. I'll never be all right with what she did, and I don't know what I'm going to do about my boys. But, to tell you the truth, my mind is currently occupied with keeping Jeannie and I alive, and my sons, Karen, her family, and my attorneys out of their clutches. As to the party, we'll see who is still in, make some final plans, and let the a-holes know where we are. If I'm still alive and not in jail after they come calling, I guess I'll have to face the painful choices again. Right now, though, I want to keep everyone alive and well, and I want some vengeance. I can't promise you this will turn out well. I can promise you I don't intend to leave any of them that have been hunting us in a position to hire people from prison, though, so maybe you want to stay out of it. Most of the ratones will remain anonymous, but my brother, they're going to want to talk to you. You need a solid alibi, like not being out here at all and being seen downtown at a restaurant and bar. So where do you think I should move to?" Nate asked, "Because you know every person in this county that matters would wonder why the hell I was in town while the Los Ratones, Los Hermanos de la Brasada, were confronting the bad guys, wouldn't they?" And what they would think of me would be far better than what I'd think of myself, or what Linda would think of me. You know better. So cut that out. Have I ever run from a fight? Have I ever failed to have your back? Do you really think I've changed enough to go hide out when people are trying to kill my little brother? Come on, man. You can't think that poorly of me. Tim hung his head, then looked up at his older brother with tears in his eyes. You know I don't, but I can't stand the thought of getting you hurt, of your son or daughter never knowing their father. Still, I know you too well, so thanks, and I love you. My son will know his father and his uncle. We've been here before, against an equally daunting foe. We kicked their butts under your erstwhile leadership, and we've kicked a few under mine since you've been away. Trust the brotherhood. We'll take care of you, and the pretty lady with the sore bottom. Jeannie came to them with tears in her eyes, stood between them, with her hips on the tailgate, and hugged both. We're going to be fine, Tim. Between you two, Dad, Daniel, and the friends you call brush rats, for some unknown reason, we're going to kick some bad guy butt. Tim dropped his hand onto her round, firm butt, squeezed and said, seems like that bottom is going to be okay, huh? She stepped back, slapped him on the arm with a faux frown and said, let's get back on the horses. I'm ready to ride, and I'll put more weight in the stirrups. But you two perverts won't. No, because you're going to stay in front of me the whole way back. You understand? They detoured by the house, where Nate dropped off more food, supplies, a bag of ammo, an assault shotgun, and 3 assault-style semi-automatic rifles with 4 30-shot clips for each. He told them they were purchased with cash at a couple of gun shows upstate, and then winked. Or maybe they were part of a cache liberated from gun runners who abandoned them when they encountered Los Cretalos in the brush. I can't really say for sure. Tim asked if the rattlesnakes got them all, and Nate shrugged. Joe inspected the AR-15s and magazines carefully and pronounced them top-of-the-line weapons. He particularly liked the assault shotgun, which he proclaimed would stop anyone or anything coming through a door or window dead on the spot. Daniel watched, but when offered one to use, he replied that he was used to his own weapons and he would use them. Daniel drove Nate's truck back to the barn so Nate and the others could scope out some of the firing positions and potential traps Joe and Tim had discussed. When they arrived back at the barn, Dora hollered that Tim had received a call and was supposed to return it pronto. He trotted to the house and called the number she had written on a pad by the phone. Ranger Jim Boyd. How may I help you? Tim identified himself, and they had a conversation that made Tim glad Nate had stayed. Before it ended, Tim told him he would call back early the morning after the party and they can make final decisions. He returned to the barn, where the horses were unsaddled and being washed off, brushed, and combed. Joe and Nate looked at him questioningly. Well, the good news is, the ranger says there are 2 officials that are elected statewide, a district judge, and 4 more lawmen involved. That includes high-ranking officials in the State Highway Patrol and the Rangers, and 2 state troopers. He said the governor called it a cluster shit of epic proportions when he was apprised. He did tell me all but one were involved with possibly young girls, not Karen. The one, however, did Karen and Jennifer both, as did the sheriff who is already in custody. So now they know how word was getting out when the chain of command was informed of plans. If that is the good news, do I even want to know the bad? Joe asked. Turns out Benton and Rogers were doing business with a client of Benton's who is connected to a Mexican cartel. They don't know how many, but the cartel is supposed to be supplying soldiers to help them. He wants to call it off, but unless they are getting scores of well-trained soldiers, I'm prone to get it over with. What do you 4 think? Joe said he would stand with Tim, whatever he decided. Jeannie said she would stand with her men, and Daniel shrugged his shoulders. Nate was thoughtful before replying, we don't want to start a war with the cartel, but we need to end this. Give me until the pachanga. I'll see what I can learn. Nate told them to go ahead with the planning, as the decision could be taken from their hands at any moment and they couldn't get caught with their pants down. Then he paused, leered at Jeannie and teased, of course, I wouldn't mind catching you with your pants down. She reacted with surprise, turned red, and then caught herself. She hit him on the shoulder and replied, I see being a pervert also runs in your family. He laughed, kissed her on the cheek, and said, you'd make a hell of a Kelly family member. You can give as good as you take, and not many can take our harassment. The smell of coffee, bacon frying, and biscuits baking woke Tim at 7. Jeannie and her dad were quietly working in the kitchen, side by side, talking softly as they worked. Good morning, sleepyhead. Just as he turned into the bathroom, one problem solved the other. So he went to the kitchen to get the cup of coffee Jeannie was holding out for him. Her bright smile warmed him on this chilly morning, but her teasing glance at his package and wink almost caused one problem to reappear. Dad is taking Dora and me shopping in Laredo for the party tonight. We're leaving at 7:30 and we'll be back after lunch. Don't worry about the decorating. The wives of some of your friends are taking care of that later this morning, which gives you time to move everything out. Oh, and Dora said you need to call Nate muy pronto. Did I sleep 24 hours? A confused Tim asked. When did all this get decided? Dad and I got up at 5:30 and watched the sun come up from the screened porch. Dora and Daniel showed up about 6:15 with the new plan, and here we are. Oh, and what about your PT? I haven't seen you do any of it. Don't you think you should call and get help out here? Tim sat silently, drinking his coffee and milk, eating biscuits with bacon gravy and bacon, acting as if he hadn't heard her. Earth to Tim. Hello? Jeannie called by his ear. He continued eating, looking around and ignoring her. Tim, she called again, and shook his arm lightly. Looking down at his food and spearing another piece of biscuit, he mumbled, a man ought to be able to drink his coffee and eat his breakfast before getting yammered at by his woman, without even so much as a kiss and howdy-do. Joe grinned, and Jeannie frowned while she tried to process what he said in such a country way. When it hit her, she grinned, turned his face to hers, and gave him a very nice kiss. Howdy-do, darling? And, just to be clear, didn't you just call me your woman? Well, I suppose you're my woman. Surely not ever cowhand around can make you howl at the moon like you did last night, Tim answered in his country voice. Joe laughed. Jeannie blushed, struck him on the near shoulder, and screamed, oh, I'm so sorry, when he winced. He rubbed his wound and told her in a little boy voice, it hurts. Will you kiss it and make it well? She eyed him suspiciously, but came close to kiss the wound as asked. Tim grabbed her, turned so he could pull her onto his lap, and forced another, more serious kiss on her. Y'all hurry back and don't spend all Daddy's money shopping, he ordered her when he turned her loose. She was a bit breathless after the intense kiss, and clung like she wanted another, even if Daddy was watching. Nope, no more kisses for you. It's nearly 7:30. We'll have to see how good you look tonight before I decide about more kisses. Some of my old girlfriends will be there, and they are pretty hot. She pushed him again, then covered her face and exclaimed, I keep hurting you. I'm so sorry. Tim laughed. I was just funnying you about it hurting. I guess all the clean air and exercise have cured me, 'cause I barely feel anything anymore. Best PT around. That he barely felt anything wasn't wholly accurate, but the arm and leg were both getting better fast, and they had bigger problems to address in the immediate future. Tim got dressed and took the power wagon to get with Daniel and call Nate. Nate was unusually excited. You're gonna love this, brother mine. Their Confederates aren't cartel. They are that same damn wannabe gangsters that we already decimated once. Well, make that twice, because the second time you weren't around. Not saying those boys aren't dangerous, 'cause they are, but they ain't connected, they ain't too bright, and they ain't well-trained cartel soldados. If we set this up right, we can end this thing before it gets started good. I'll be out with a couple of ratones in an hour. We're going to bring some supplies and equipment. One thing I'd like for you to do is run the irrigation well enough to make sure we can overflow your tank and get some water in the arroyo between the hills. I'll explain when I get there, okay? Bueno, Tim replied. Dora is gone shopping with Jeannie and her dad, so you might want to bring something for lunch. Daniel has the brisket on for the party, but we've got too much to do to stop and fix something for lunch. Nate suggested, how about a pan of enchiladas from Tio Mauricio's cafe, a salad, and some RC? I'll bet Daniel can scrounge up some flour tortillas too. Tim said that sounded delicious, but they may need a siesta afterward. Tim and Daniel turned the irrigation well on. The holding tank was already full, so water started running out the pipe into the arroyo. They turned it off and discussed what Nate's plan could be. Tim started grinning after a moment, but they just went back to the implement shed and started moving tractors, combines, grain drills, discs, plows, and shredders out so the ladies could decorate. There was an oil spot under the tractor. Daniel put cat litter on it to soak it up, then started pulling tables and chairs out of the storage building on the west end of the 3-bay shed. Tim ran the gasoline blower to clean the dirt off the concrete floor, and then washed the dirt and oil off with the power washer. They had everything ready when the decorating committee arrived, which led to a lot of hugs, kisses, and welcome homes. Tim knew every one of them, and had known some of them carnally before they were married. There were some tight hugs exchanged. Tim used an extension ladder to connect the extension cord to the old-fashioned Edison-style Christmas lights left hanging in the rafters hanging year-round, and then helped Daniel set up the tables and chairs according to the wishes of the decorating committee. The committee members covered and decorated the tables and hung bunting between the posts. The DJ showed up with his equipment, So the two men helped him set up the sound system with 6 large speakers. He tested the equipment, adjusted the volume and sound for the open shed, and went back to town. The decorating committee told them goodbye with besos y abrazos and left soon thereafter. Nate and Chewie arrived minutes after they left, and they ate lunch on an extra, undecorated table to avoid the wrath of the committee members they would incur if a tablecloth got dirty. After lunch, they considered Nate's plan for confrontation and defeat of the invaders they expected within a few days. A few changes were made after they rode through and around the expected battlegrounds, and Tim insisted noting be finalized until the colonel had more input. Chewie was another Vietnam combat vet. He was full of great ideas for traps, but traps meant every Raton had to be aware of and avoid them. The shoppers returned around 3 rather than 1:30, with the second seat of Joe's pickup full of bags. Dora got out, took 2 bags out of the seat, and went into the house. Tim, Nate, Chewie, and Daniel were sitting under the palm arbor at the cattle pens, watching. Joe gave them a come-on wave out the window and headed to the ranch house. By the time the others arrived, Joe and Jeannie were carrying the other 6 bags inside. A couple of bags were obviously from Nuevo Laredo, but Tim also spotted bags from Hutchars, Richter's, Foley's, and Joe Brand. He wondered aloud how they had time to go to all those places between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Joe responded that he and Dora kept the other shopper on a short leash and laughed. I didn't know how long we would be here, what we would be doing, or that we wouldn't have a washer and dryer. I needed clothes. Jeannie explained. It looks like you got a few clothes, Nate teased. But is that really enough for staying here a month or so? Jeannie replied, not even close, but now I know where all the good shops are. Turning to Tim, she exclaimed, I got you and Daddy something too. Nice leather belts with silver buckles from Mexico, new Wrangler cowboy cut jeans, and Mexican-style Western shirts from Joe Brand. Tim fixed her with a hard look. So you got 5 bags of clothes and we got a belt, jeans, and a shirt? Kinda selfish, don't you think? She grinned. Next time you come with me. With the Grand Fiesta only hours away, Nate and Chewie started for town. While Jeannie began her preparations, Tim took Joe on a tour of the selected battlefield and got feedback on the revised plans, including the traps Chewie advocated. Like Chewie, Joe was a Vietnam vet, and he agreed that traps would be helpful in herding the enemy into the killing field, and he added a few more sites. He was a bit skeptical of Nate's plan to skyline the enemy, but agreed that would quickly turn the battle into a turkey shoot if it worked. If not, the other plans would be sufficient. Back at the house, the men used the small bathroom to shower and shave, leaving Jeannie to do her things in the big bathroom with the dressing table. When Tim walked out fully dressed in the new clothes Jeannie had bought, he and Joe roared in laughter, pointing at each other in gleeful disbelief. Joe's Western shirt was black with gold and silver spirals above the yoke, covering his upper chest, his shoulders, and upper back. Tim's pearl snap Mexican-style Western shirt was pearly white, with green vines and leaves leading to bright red roses. Even his cuffs were embroidered with roses, leaves, and vines. After they regained their equilibrium, they opened 2 Lone Star long necks, took a seat at the table, and gave each other hell about their costumes. They had liked each other right away, but over the past few days they had bonded as close friends, age be damned. Perhaps their common affection for Jeannie was part of it, but mostly they just liked and admired each other. They were on their second beers when they heard the door handle turn, and both changed positions so they could see Jeannie's grand entrance. It was indeed grand. Her honey gold hair fell in waves to her shoulders. Her lovely face was lightly made up, and her lips were bright pink. The dress was a rainbow of bright Mexican colors: pink, blue, green, and yellow, each swirl moving through the spectrum from the lightest to the darkest shade of that color. She twirled gracefully, flaring the skirt more and displaying another 6 inches of shapely leg, and asked triumphantly, "How do I look?" The question was superfluous and she knew it. Neither Tim nor her dad had closed their gaping mouths since she suddenly appeared. "Jeannie, you must have bought that when you and Dora sent me back to the Cadillac bar to order lunch," Joe stated. "As pretty as it is, I'm not sure I approve of it on my youngest daughter." His countenance was stern and disapproving, but the hint of a smile around his eyes and mouth belied his words. Tim countered, "Sorry, Dad, but I'd have to disagree. She looks very, very nice in it." Jeannie beamed and twirled again, giving Tim a glimpse of white lace undies. Dad covered his eyes, but Tim stared, and his eyes grew wide when she mouthed, "They match," with a coquettish grin. "Are my guys ready to go? You both look so good in your new clothes. I can hardly wait to show you off." "You mean you show yourself off, don't you?" Tim corrected. "You are going to create a shitstorm when you walk in, fashionably late as we are, as he looked at his watch. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not fighting half the county to keep your honor, so don't be drinking a bunch and flirting. Jeannie started out the door, shook her booty at him, and teased, I can't help it if guys think I'm cute and want to talk to me. Dad, this is your child. Can't you deal with her? Tim Foe pleaded, and they both laughed. Tonight was going to be interesting. He had a feeling this was skin-tight electric blue dress Jeannie, and wondered if Dad had ever encountered her before. Joe parked in a spot Dora had reserved that was located right beside the shed, with the passenger door facing the crowd milling about. Some watched as the unknown truck appeared and parked, but most continued their happy, loud conversations. Jeannie waited for Tim to open her door and assist her in stepping daintily down from her dad's tall 4x4. Normally she would hop right out, but this was a part of her debut in front of Tim's friends and old lovers. Tia Dora had advised her that a blonde goddess arriving in eye-catching Mexican-style party gear would catch their attention, and then it was up to her to entice and charm them. It seemed to be working, she thought, as the din of the crowd dimmed and eyes fixated on her and her big, sexy companion. She thought Tim looked like a walking hunk of sexy with his powerful athlete's body encased in the tight jeans and form-fitting shirt, wearing a black Stetson hat and black dress boots, with the oversized silver buckle drawing attention to his flat stomach above and the large package displayed below. Dad hung back, giving the spotlight to his daughter and her prey, and thinking that maybe the princess hadn't gone away, at least not completely. The next half hour was a blur of making acquaintances for Jeannie and her dad, and renewing them for Tim. As much as Tim and Joe laughed at their outfits, they fit right in. As sexy as Jeannie was dressed, she fit right in. Dora was right. Nate wasn't as tall nor built as Tim, but Jeannie had to admit he looked really good dressed up in his cowboy clothes. She also had to admit that his wife, Linda, was simply gorgeous. Linda was about 5 feet 9 inches with wavy chestnut hair, the slender but curvy body of a swimsuit model, and legs that were unnaturally long and shapely. She found herself feeling envious of Linda, until Linda loudly disclosed her envy of Jeannie's blonde good looks, dynamite body, and the most beautiful legs I've ever seen. Abandoning the brothers, the new friends walked off arm in arm, with Linda telling Jeannie she had to meet all her friends, and she simply had to tell her all about her and Tim. Together again, Nate crooned as he put his arm through Tim's. They walked toward a bunch of men standing by the keg, and Nate continued mocking his wife. You need to get to know all sus hermanos, primos, and cuñados again, and you simply have to tell me all about you and Jeannie. Tim elbowed him in the ribs, and they both laughed as they walked over to the kegs, where they were warmly greeted as the old friends they were. There were about a dozen men clustered around the kegs, and an equal number of women clustered around Jeannie at the punch bowl, which was filled with Chita's infamous Caribbean rum punch. She claimed the recipe was handed down from her grandmother, but anyone who tried it was convinced it was developed by pirates with too much rum on hand. It tasted great, but wasted anyone with more than a couple of cups. Jeannie had been warned, but Tim saw she was busy talking while eagerly drinking and feared for her health. Does she have a cast-iron stomach? Nate asked Joe when he walked up. Because she barely weighs a buck, and she's drinking that dangerous concoction like it's water. Joe shook his head, not hardly, but she overdrinks when she's nervous, and she's been nervous since sunup, so keep an eye on her. Oh, there are plenty of eyes on her at all times, right amigos? Nate asked the men gathered around. Pretty much every one of them responded enthusiastically that they planned to watch her carefully all night, and were glad to do it, while grinning at Tim. Someone in the other group said something to Jeannie and Linda, and the entire group of ladies waved at the men, refreshed their drinks, and walked over to join them. It was hard for Tim to tell if Jeannie was already high on the punch, or just high on the party and all the new people. He heard a whistle, turned to the pits, and saw Daniel signaling them to come help carry the ice chests full of brisket. Daniel and his pit crew had taken turns checking and putting sauce on the briskets all afternoon, and had been letting them rest for the last few hours in the ice chests, wrapped in butcher paper. It took 2 men on each 64-quart chest, and there were 3 chests full of brisket. That was way too much for tonight, but left plenty for their guests to take home. South Texas hospitality. The brisket was unwrapped on a cutting board at the end of the long table, full of covered dishes the guests had brought, and Daniel began to trim and slice it, asking moist or trim of each guest. The Kelly boys, Linda, Jeannie, and Joe waited until last, standing by the line to greet and briefly visit with each of their 80-odd guests before they got their plates and food. Dora stood behind the table, prepared to bring up more of anything running low from a table behind her where extras were cached. Jeannie had already charmed many of the women, and the men were bewitched by simply standing close to her. Tim knew she was already considered one of us. After all, Linda treated her like a sister, and she came with him so she had instant acceptance. What he wondered was how she explained her relationship with him to the throng of women. He had yet to display any overt affection, but everyone seemed to accept that they were together. That begot the question, why has no one asked about or spoken of Karen? He decided that Nate, Linda, Dora, and Daniel were the answer to that question. The meal was amazing. Daniel was a master pit boss. Dora's special sauce was unlike that used in Central Texas, but also unlike the usual South Texas fare. The covered dishes were likewise delicious, and unlike those served with brisket in Central Texas, but also not typical of South Texas. Dora's frijoles borrachos were uniquely hers, full of secret ingredients that evoked flavors that no one could adequately describe. The DJ started playing bouncy background music as soon as the first guests visited the dessert table, and by the time the Kellys, Hildebrands, and Mendez finished their tres leches cake, Mexican polka music was blaring and dancers were twirling. Jeannie and Linda were dancing in their seats and giving puppy dog eyes to their escorts, so the brothers stood and asked them to dance. 5 polkas later, the DJ suddenly introduced a belly-rubbin' country song, and Hank Williams was singing, "I'm so lonesome I could cry," as couples looked at one another and embraced. Jeannie turned her pretty face upward, locked eyes with Tim, and then laid her head on his chest and tightened her hold on his waist. They danced silently, and Tim saw other couples smiling at them. She smelled heavenly, was so light on her feet and skilled at dancing they moved as one. And her body was so enticing he couldn't control his response. She felt the hardness, looked up and gave him a wicked grin, and then pressed harder against it. When the song ended, he held her in place and whispered, "You caused this. You have to keep it concealed." Another slow song began. She looped her arms around his neck, arched her back so her chest was away from him, and pressed her luscious lower body against his hardness. She crooked her head just a bit, gave him an innocent smile, batted her eyes, and asked, "Whatever do you mean, Tim? I heard you telling people that we are just work colleagues and friends with a common problem. Surely a colleague and friend wouldn't cause such a stiff reaction." "I might have been understating our relationship a bit," he replied. "A bit?" she asked. "Well, maybe more than a bit," he answered. She ground her hips against him and pursued the opening. "So, more than a little bit. Do you mean a big bit? Or do you really mean you're crazy about me but can't admit it?" "The latter," he answered quietly. "But we're both married and I don't want my friends to get the wrong idea about you." "I wouldn't worry. Between Dora, Linda, and Nate, our story is awfully well known among your friends. As your old girlfriend who is a lawyer said, if 2 parties enter into a contract and either party breaks it, the contract is abrogated. They accept that our marriages are over and just seem happy that I'm not some harpy out to destroy their temedio precioso." She snuggled back up to him as silver wings carried them around the floor. Tim saw her dad in a huddle with several of the older couples, including Chewy, his wife Alicia, Dora, and Daniel. Their conversation seemed pretty intense for a party, and from time to time, Joe and others would look his way. He wasn't sure if that was because of what was being said, or the way Joe's daughter was dancing with Tim. Patsy Cline sang Willie Nelson's "Crazy," extending the cuddle sessions on the floor. Tim studied the couples, remembering his personal connection with each person, and it struck him that these are his people. It was easy to feel betrayed by his wife, colleagues, and fellow coaches when he watched those damn films, but he realized tonight that he shouldn't have, because not a single one of them was a friend, except Karen. No one here, not a man or a woman, would have done what they did to him. Sure, Karen is a rare beauty, but his true friends would never have tried to seduce her, and if she had tried to seduce them, they would have turned her down and told Tim. His heart toughened yet again, like drying concrete. Each day seasoned and strengthened his anger and resolve. It wasn't just the betrayal, he came to understand. It was the disrespect. Every single one of them, including his loving wife, disrespected him in the rancorest way possible. To make it more odoriferous and offensive, Karen disrespected her husband, her family, and the vows she took in front of 400 invited guests and family members. With her also being hunted, and with her seemingly taking good care of their sons, his resolve about dumping her as quickly and as hurtfully as possible had softened. Now, however, he realized not a single woman in this place tonight would do what she had done, and his resolve turned to stone. Jeannie seemed to sense his turmoil. She hugged him even tighter and mumbled something against his chest that sounded like, "I love you." He squeezed her in return, mumbled the same words into her hair, and looked over at her dad and the others to ascertain their demeanor. They were gone. He danced Jeannie in a circle to survey the entire shed. He saw none of them, but he see a fresh fire flaring in the calf pen. "It's time, sweetie," he told the blonde angel in his arms. "We need to have our meetings." She loosened her embrace and looked up at him. "You and Dora clarify things for the women. I'll be with the men. Emphasize that we can't say when or how many, but we need to be prepared effective tomorrow afternoon. Anyone could be a target due to the involvement of Los Diablos, and they need to understand the potential danger. Some of their men have been involved in the 3 events that have transpired over the years, and at least 2 of them were among the girls recovered who were slated for slavery. Make them understand. Tell them whatever you need to about the people who have been trying to kill me and kidnap you, but make them understand the danger. We don't want to lose friends to complacency." Jeannie broke away. Tim nodded at the DJ, who killed the music and asked the ladies to remain in the shed and the men to go to the cattle pens. He got up and fell in behind Tim, while Jeannie moved to the middle to meet up with Dora. When all the men were gathered in the calf pen around the fire, Tim called Nate, Joe, Chewy, and Daniel to join him, and Chewy called his younger brother, Abel, over. Tim briefly explained the situation, and then stated that anyone who had other responsibilities should leave, with no hard feelings or judgment. No one stirred. He nodded and proceeded, this time with greater detail about the who and why. He admitted that they had no idea when the confrontation would come down or how many they would face, so they would have to be on alert and ready at a moment's notice for an unknown number of days. He stressed that the inclusion of Los Diablos meant some, maybe all, of them were possibly in danger, as were their families, and told them that the women were being told the same thing at the shed. As to the how, he asked Nate, Joe, Chewy, and Daniel to lay out the plans. Nate laid out the battle plans, Joe fleshed them out, and Chewy and his brother talked about the traps and the materials they would need. Daniel talked about his role, about communications before, during, and after the fight. He turned to the 2 out-of-uniform and off-duty deputy sheriffs and asked them to explain the role they would play. Jose nodded to Jesse, who answered, "You guys all know Miguel and he knows you. But neither the sheriff's office nor state law enforcement will get involved until an attack occurs, and that could be too late. He asks that we respect the law, but more importantly, that we respect the intention of the law, which is to keep citizens safe from criminals. His office and other law enforcement agencies are concerned about rumors they are hearing. Those rumors involve a drug gang that has been a problem in South Texas in times past, helping a group of men involved in a conspiracy to kill, kidnap, and or enslave several citizens over a grudge. He wants one of us to be here at all times beginning tomorrow, driving unmarked cars with the best radio equipment. If intruders enter the ranch, we are to inform him in code via the radio, and then help defend the targets. Other deputies will be hidden along each of the roads that lead here, and will give us a heads up if they spot anything suspicious. Mis amigos y hermanos. Ahora, somos ratones de la brasada. Debemos proteger a nuestras familias y a nuestros amigos de estos hombres malvado. This is our land and these are our people. Tomedio protected us, our sisters and mothers, from Los Diablos before, and Nate and Chewy led us to victory against them twice more. Now we band together once again, to protect ourselves and our own, and to banish the evil ones once and for all. Los ratones de la brasada. The group of 48 men roared, fists punching at the sky. Tim screamed a rebel yell, Nate joined in, and that was returned as 47 gritos. When the last echoes died out, Joe asked who could be here tomorrow at 6 p.m. for a run-through, which evoked another round of gritos and cries of Pandilla Tassigillo. Tim felt the mix of adrenaline and testosterone burning through his veins, and joined the throng striding to the implement shed after one ratón yelled, Hermanos, vamos a nuestros mujeres hermosas, para bailar y tomar cerveza. Tim thought of the beautiful woman waiting there for him, and remembered how wonderful she felt when they danced. He did want another beer, but it was the mujer hermosa he craved. Los mujeres hermosas gave out a long, loud, and proud grito of their own when they saw their men returning, and enthusiastic hugs were given and received. The DJ fired up the music again, playing polkas and salsas, and then exciting the men with jarabe tapatio, the traditional Mexican hat dance. Sombreros were in short supply and the dresses were way too short, but that only meant that the whirling, twirling, and spinning women displayed a lot more leg. Tim was surprised that Jeannie knew the dance, but wasn't surprised that La Guerra Bonita drew the loudest and longest cheers when their turn in the spotlight came last. Her blonde hair flying around her lovely face and shoulders, her gorgeous dancer's legs displayed all the way to her lacy panties, and her graceful, flirty, and sexy dancing style drew screams of delight. She was completely in the moment, unconcerned about the crowd and the leering cries. After all, She told him later. She had many years of experience dancing before much bigger crowds, and, anyway, she was dancing for him. The DJ gave everyone a moment to recover and praise each other, and then announced that the time was late, so this would be the last song. He played a final song for all the lovers, and everyone danced, even Joe, who was matched with Dora's youngest sister, the only single woman present. As they held each other, Tim quietly translated the words to Cuando Caliente el Sol, one of the sexiest songs ever written. Jeannie nestled ever closer as he spoke the words of love and lust. When it ended, she looked up at him with dreamy eyes and quietly said, "I want you." He kissed her forehead and held her for a moment before people began coming by to say they were leaving and thanking them for hosting. Tim deflected the credit to where it belonged, to Daniel and Dora. When the crowd dwindled, Tim used the phone to call Jim Boyd. "We will be as ready as we're going to get after tomorrow night. Any last thoughts or any news you can share? We're now positive that we've identified the leaks because we caught them in the act on tape. What day is best for you?" Boyd replied, "We have dress rehearsal tomorrow at dark. Any time after that is fine. In fact, the sooner the better. My guys have real lives they need to get back to, and we're way past ready to end it." As soon as they got in Joe's truck, he said, "Jeannie, Tim needs to share more about his life before this gets too serious." "Tim, my guess is that Karen never knew about your training, the exploits of Los Ratones YL Ray, or about your Viking bloodlines, did she? You don't need to answer, but you do need to share it all with my daughter. If I know her, it won't matter, but she needs to know who she's with. Everyone sees you as the great teacher and coach, the confidant of kids and teachers, the FCA sponsor, and the champion of right over wrong. But I confirm tonight that you are much more complicated than that. Understand, I'm not judging. I'm a lot more complicated than Dad the car dealer and church deacon myself, and Jeannie will see things in both of us she never dreamed we were capable of over the next few days and night. But Amelia knows all about me and chose to be with me. You need to pay Jeannie the same courtesy and let her choose." "Yes, sir, I agree. I'll do that tonight or tomorrow if you prefer," Tim replied. "I'm staying with Chewy and Imelda tonight. We are going to get up very early and build things for the upcoming event. So you two are on your own until dusk tomorrow," Joe replied. "I'll see you then." He left a confused Jeannie with a kiss on her cheek, shook Tim's hand, and drove away. "What was that all about?" she asked with a questioning frown. He, Chewy, Daniel, and their wives, along with several others, had a serious conversation about me in the shed, Tim explained. "He wants me to come clean about some things that may concern you, even disturb you. When do you want me to do that?" Jeannie was watching his face intently. He saw the frown leave her pretty face and be replaced by a smile. "Well, we have until dusk tomorrow. Let's have that serious talk tomorrow over coffee. The dance was too much fun, and I have better plans for tonight." She sensed Tim's inner turmoil. On the one hand, he was obviously enchanted with her. On the other, he knew they were both still married. Married to cheaters, married to people who didn't respect them and tried to kill and kidnap them, at least in Jeannie's case, but still married. But as the lawyer said, a contract abrogated by either side is revoked and unenforceable. As soon as she got him into the dark house, she pivoted to face him, plastered her lush body to him, and pulled his head down for a kiss she hoped expressed her feelings and lust for him. Tim wavered, but she still felt the conflict. "They broke the contract, baby, not us. There is no contract if either party breaks it, and they shattered our contracts with them. I know my dad is concerned about your past, but I don't care if you were an axe murderer before I met you. I know who you are now, and I love that person. We'll see about that in the morning," Tim murmured into her hair. "Tonight I'm going to show you how I feel about you. If tomorrow you want nothing more to do with me, well, that's your choice and I'll honor it. Honey, I know more than you think I do," Jeannie assured him. "The women weren't sitting there quietly while you had your war council. They were talking about the upcoming event, the past events, and how you saved some of them from a fate worse than death. I may appear naive, but I know more about Daddy than he thinks I do, and I know more about you than you think I do." Her eyes sought his, the timbre of her voice became husky, and she challenged. "I'm going to rock your world tonight, Tim. Do you think you're up to the test?" They made love. Their oxytocin-flooded brains convinced them that the level of satisfaction they had achieved was a first for mankind, and they held each other contentedly and with a feeling of boundless love. It was mid-morning when the first cup of coffee was poured, and they were ravenous. "Breakfast, or go straight to lunch?" Tim asked. She looked at the clock and decided lunch was the better choice. Tim went out to his truck and brought in the wrapped half-brisket Daniel had placed in his ice chest earlier in the morning. He hadn't said anything, but Tim heard noise and watched him put it in the ice chest along with a bag of cut-up lettuce and tomatoes and a jar of salsa. A package of flour tortillas was lying on the tailgate in the warm sun. So they had all the makings for brisket tacos. The tacos and coffee hit the spot, rejuvenating the lovers. After the remaining food was put away and the table cleaned, Tim poured each a fresh coffee and invited her to join him around the glass-topped table on the screened porch. When they were seated, he asked, "Do you want me to tell you my life story? Or have you already heard enough that you prefer to ask me questions?" Jeannie fixed her emerald eyes on him and answered matter-of-factly, "You are the kindest man on earth, protective of your friends and family, and everyone loves you for those things. When crossed or your family and friends are threatened, you are harder than nails, unforgiving and dangerous. You are the best friend and worst enemy anyone can have." That's what I was told. What else can you add? A lot of detail, that is the gist, but it doesn't really paint the picture in color. Harder than nails doesn't accurately describe cutting the throat of a human-looking creature who is guarding the girls he helped drug and kidnap, and has been physically and sexually abusing. That version doesn't show the house where the rest of the drug peddling, girl molesting, white slavers are partying going up in flames as Molotov cocktails turn the back of the house into an inferno. You can't hear the hail of gunfire that greets them when they run wildly out of the house, shooting blindly, some on fire. You don't hear the interrogation of the survivors, or their pleas when they realize that telling us everything they knew didn't mean they would live, or even die quickly. Harder than nails, unforgiving, and dangerous are good descriptors, but inadequate. So, Jeannie, if you want all the details, I'll give you the play-by-play. I respect you enough to do that, and you need to know what you are getting into if you decide to stay with me after the upcoming fracas. I accept that if you hear all the details, or after you see me in action, you may never want to see me again, and I will honor that. I will hate it, but I will honor it. My friends are right. Something in me goes cold inside when a wrong is done to me or mine. My blood boils, but my soul goes cold. I'm ruthless and relentless, without conscience or mercy. My dad says it's the combination of the Irish, Scottish, and Viking blood in me. I don't know about that, but from what I've read about my heritage, I am, like them, a warrior, a berserker, in battle. I never told Karen because I didn't want her to know. I didn't want to terrify her, knowing that the guy she was married to was actually a monster, or at least could become a monster. Unfortunately, you have already been forewarned, and are likely to get a first-person view soon. Hiding it from you in hopes I'll never be put in that position again, as I did with Karen, isn't an option. Your dad knows, and he understands. He's been there. It concerns him, but he understands, and he knows he and your mom have lived a good life in spite of his past actions. That doesn't mean you and I can, but at least we have a role model. Regardless, I will enjoy every moment with you as long as you will have me. If that is only another day or two, so be it. I'll love you anyway, but I'll love you from afar. Jeannie's gaze was, and had remained unwavering throughout his soliloquy. She reached out her hand, stroked his cheek, and promised, "I already know your soul, Timothy. I won't shy from the fight, nor will I shy from loving you and trusting you to always be good to me, our family, and our friends. I'm not afraid of the fight, or of what you will do. We became one last night, and so we will remain." Mom told us about Dad's army career, and she said he did things in the war that he wasn't proud of, but it was war. Rescuing those poor girls who had been kidnapped and assaulted was war. And when they invade your property with the intention of killing you, kidnapping me, turning me into a spicy star, and selling me into slavery, well, that is war too. You do what you should, whatever you must, to end this. I have a question for you, Tim. Am I strong enough for you? That worries me. I should have stood up to Larry long ago. No, when he threatened me while we were engaged because I was talking to one of his friends, I should told him to buzz off. When we got married and he kept me from my family, I should have stood up to him. And when he hit me and blamed it on me, I should have called the police and pressed charges. I was too weak, I guess, but now, I swear I would. I swear I will pull the trigger and shoot him between the eyes if he tries to take me. Maybe that makes me a monster too. I don't know. I just know that I draw strength from you, and I hope I'm not sapping you in return. Tim smiled and motioned for her to sit with him on the padded love seat along the wall. He pulled her onto his lap when she approached. Damn, can't you two get enough? I mean, this is most definitely entertaining. But stop. Jeannie blushed at Nate catching them. She just looked over her shoulder at him and said, "Your timing is bad, Nate." Tim raised his head from her teat, pulled the top back up, and replied, "Joe said we had until 3. You're 3 hours early. That was before we got the call that they are heading out this afternoon and will be here around dark. Still got a few things to do before then. So turn your lady loose, get yourself under control, and let's get cracking, bro. Nate laughed and shook his head. Damn, was all he said before he turned and walked to his truck. Tim slipped on jeans and boots. Jeannie left her cute dress on, but slipped on socks and boots. When they got in Nate's truck, Jeannie went around to the back door, but Tim winked and said, "Ride up here with us. I'm sure you won't distract Nate too bad." They were approaching the pins and barn and saw at least a dozen vehicles already there. Nate parked by the barn, and they greeted the men and women who had assembled. "Hear that the miscreants are in a hurry to get here and take care of business," Tim said to the group in a voice underlain with humor. "Good to see the squad leaders are ready to welcome them." He began asking for an update. "We kind of slept in this morning, so catch me up." The ear-to-ear grins turned into a roar of laughter that made him pause. He feigned a frown and confusion. "What? I didn't say anything funny," he interjected with mock aggravation. They all laughed louder, and Jeannie began turning red when everyone looked at her. Slept in? Sleeping isn't what everyone out here trying to work heard. In fact, Daniel says he doesn't think you slept a wink all night. He thought maybe the coyotes howling and the wildcats screaming kept you awake, or vice versa. Jeannie turned purple and buried her head on Tim's back, studiously avoiding her dad's eyes and evading those of these people she barely knew. Tim held out as long as he could, but seeing Joe laughing along with the rest, he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Yeah, I did hear a wildcat yowling a couple of times, but Jeannie kept nodding off, so she probably missed it." She pinched him hard on the back, buried her face in his shirt for a moment while the crescendo of laughter died down, and then stepped around him to face her tormentors. "Okay, y'all are being mean to me. Just because I'm a city girl and I don't know all about the dangerous creatures out here doesn't mean you can make fun of me." They laughed again and she continued defiantly, "Some of you even warned me last night, but I didn't have any experience with creatures like that. So yeah, maybe I screamed in terror, or something, a few times." Even her dad broke down laughing this time, but she forged on. "Maybe the night terrors are even hereditary. I certainly heard my mother scream out often enough when I lived at home," she said pointedly, cutting her eyes at her dad, who only laughed harder. "So I think you gentlemen and ladies should let me keep some of my dignity and stop bringing my hereditary weakness up." She had her hands on her hips and a no-nonsense look on her pretty face when she concluded, but she couldn't control the little smile sneaking around her mouth and eyes. "Que son gentlemen y ladies?" asked Abel. "Yo no sé. Creo que es como damas y caballeros. You know, those gay guys that dance around hats and embroidered pants," replied one. "There are none of those here, Bonita. Besides, how can it be the night terrors when it's the middle of the morning?" The entire crowd, including Tim, collapsed in laughter. After trying to remain aloof and disappointed for a few more seconds, Jeannie gave up and joined in. When it started dying down, she turned and swatted Tim with an open hand on his chest, away from his wounds, and stated, "This is all your fault." Tim grinned in return. "Guilty as charged, although I must say you are quite easily terrified." She hit him again, while giving him her silliest lovesick grin, and laid her head on his chest. Linda and the other three ladies came to her rescue, telling her to come with them to get away from these mean men. They headed for the house. The men watched them go. Juan yelled, "Ahí van las pumas," which resulted in the four joining arms and walking with a lot of waggle. The men laughed, and then grew serious. "Guys, I'm sorry I drew you into this mess. Maybe you should go home and take care of your families. We can handle it without getting any of you hurt." "You mean like you did when my wife and his sister were kidnapped?" Pablo asked, and pointed at Juan. "That wasn't your problem, but you made it your problem. We're making this our problem. Don't think there is a single raton in this county or any other that is going to stand by while you take on 3 carloads of killers. Hell, I'm insulted that mi hermano would even suggest such a thing." Every man there responded in agreement. Tim nodded with misty eyes and apologized for his mistake. "Lo siento. Mea culpa." Chewy patted him on the back and squeezed his shoulder. "De nada, hermano. De nada." Tim cleared his throat and entered the tack room. He moved the largest saddle stand, unlocked a recessed padlock hidden under it, and raised a trapdoor. He went down a short flight of stairs, and then opened a vault-like door with a combination lock. Joe, Daniel, Chewy, and Nate began handing weapons up the stairs to the others, who created 6 upright stacks. Each stack included 2 sniper rifles with night scopes, 3 semi-automatic shotguns with round magazines of ammo, and 6 assault rifles with a 60-shot magazine plus 3 auxiliary magazines on attached belts. The final items added were a grenade launcher and a shoulder-fired missile. When Tim came back up after closing everything, he saw the wide eyes of his squad leaders. "Damn, Tim, you've been adding some good shit. When did you get the new stuff?" Nate asked. "I've been adding it on the way to town each time I visit for the last year. Daniel knows about it and how to access. It's always available when Los Ratones are in need. Not that I give a shit, but just how illegal is some of this stuff?" asked Deputy Sheriff Jesse Sturgeon, who was the sheriff's right-hand man. Tim looked him in the eyes and answered, "Let's just say that after the battle we need to police our areas, pick up the brass, and return everything to the underground vault. It's probably best that we not use the bazooka or the grenade launchers unless we have to, but I've been assured from on high that the investigation, if there is anything to investigate, will not be all that thorough. We may, however, have to bury more than I thought if 3 carloads are coming." "Don't worry, boss. I dug an extra pit after Nate called me," Daniel assured him. "But it isn't 3 carloads, it's 3 van loads. Probably 8 or 9 per van. But it could be 10-inch," stated Deputy Sturgeon, who looked at Daniel. "No, Luase. We've got plenty of room, even if we have to bury the vans," he answered with a shrug. Leroy stepped to the front. "Tim, I need to install the phone and the speaker soon. I got here at sunup and ran the line on your power poles, then made a repair call over in Millet. All I need to do is drop the line from the pole to the house and install the equipment, and run a line from wherever we place the speaker to your cassette player and mic. It won't take much over an hour, but to keep on my schedule I need to start now. We don't want anyone at the co-op headquarters asking questions. Do you want to come with me? Or just tell me where you want everything? You guys know what to do. Go ahead and get things set up for your station before the others get here. If you have questions, talk to Joe, Nate, Chewy, or Daniel. I'll get Jeannie and we'll go to the house with Leroy. She might have a preference on where," Tim said by way of explanation. He glanced at Joe, who smiled and said, "Good idea. I promise you she will have preferences, and she will have a reason." He borrowed Nate's truck and went to get Jeannie. He explained why he needed her, and she scurried out to cries of "Good girl." Already got him trained. They led Leroy to the house, with Jeannie plastered to Tim. She did have preferences, and she had good reasons. Leroy installed 2 phone jacks, tested everything, and tested the 2 phones. "Everything is good. I'm going back to town, do some paperwork, check out, and I'll be back at 5 with most of the others. See you then." Jeannie wrapped her arms around him when he drove off and asked, "Do we have time for a quickie? I need you again. Looks like an angel, screws like a devil, screams like a cougar, and is as insatiable as a minx. What have I gotten myself into?" Tim asked the heavens. They had been laying in each other's arms for a couple of minutes, catching their breath, when they heard, "Damn, what a sound show," Linda exclaimed as she knocked and then entered the cabin. Tim and Jeannie scrambled to pull the covers over them in the bedroom, and managed just as Linda stuck her head in the door. "Oh, you're all covered up. I'm disappointed. Can you go again? It sounds so exciting. Nate and I can sit quietly in the corner and watch. That should help invigorate our sex life," Linda announced with excitement while Nate grinned. "Wipe those shit-eating grins off your faces and get the hell out of our bedroom, a-holes," Tim ordered in his angry voice. "Well, we can, but Daddy is going to be here in a couple of minutes, and he may not want to see and hear you two at play," Nate warned. Jeannie tried to get out of bed, realized she was without her clothes except for the boots, shrieked, and ordered them out of the room so she could clean up and get dressed. They left laughing. The shower turned off. They heard Jeannie rustling around. She came storming out of the bathroom and toward the bedroom, but froze when she saw her dad. She was fully dressed and looked as pretty and put together as before, except slightly red-faced. She stared at the table for a moment, which gave her audience an opportunity to show off their grins. Relenting, she dropped her hands, raised her chin shamelessly, and walked to them. "Why are you showering in the middle of the day, Jeannie?" asked Linda with a smirk. "I felt sweaty and rinsed off," she declared. "I'll bet you did," Nate agreed, which instigated another round of laughter from the 3 and a chuckle from Tim. "Kitten, am I going to have to change your nickname to Wild Kitten?" Joe asked. "Linda says even a pillow can't douse your yowling. ET2, brute?" Jeannie inquired with a frown and scrunched up mouth. "Even my own father is making fun of me now?" "Hey, I wasn't making fun of you when I told him. I was jealous," Linda interjected. Screams of delight, passing out. "Sounds like great fun to me." Jeannie signaled Tim to pull his chair away from the table and then sat down in his lap. She gave him a quick kiss, turned back to Linda, winked, and replied, "Let me just say I've never had more or better fun. Having fun with Tim is a life-changing experience, if you know what I mean. Her dad put his hands over his ears. Tim beamed with pride. Nate laughed, and Linda, with a twinkle in her eye and a wink, said, I wouldn't know about that, but his brother shows me a lot of fun from time to time. It must run in the family. Everyone was having a great time, laughing and talking, until the new phone rang. After a brief conversation, Tim somberly informed them, well, I guess we've put this off as long as we can. A pickup carrying Rogers, Slaughter, Barnes, Hughes, and Benton left Lake Travis at noon. No one knows the route, but they didn't turn toward east, so they will probably work their way down 281, go all the way to 87, or use back roads all the way. Word is that they will rendezvous in San Antonio with a van coming from Del Rio, one coming from Sequin, and one already in San Antonio. We should expect them to arrive in the county around 5 p.m. I doubt they will come straight here, but we need to go ahead and get the word out so we can be prepared if they arrive in daylight. I don't see that happening. They will almost certainly wait until it gets dark, probably closer to 8, but we have quite a few last-minute actions to take. Nate, do we need to call, or are we good? Let's call to affirm, but we're good either way, Nate replied. Joe, Jeannie, and Linda went to Mendez's house to tell those already gathered there in person. Tim and Nate went to the oil storage tanks on the hillside, hooked the hose to the tank valve, laid the hoses out all the way down to the creek, and then connected them. All that remained was to open the valve and turn on the pump on the well. They checked each battle station to ensure good cover had been erected, and checked the generators for the light stands on each flank. Everything looked good, so they drove to the implement shed. The sheriff's Bronco pulled in just in before they did. He waited and greeted them as the Kelly boys before walking over to the larger group of men relaxing on hay bales, chairs, and benches. He was carrying a canvas sack, which he laid on a table. He acknowledged each man by name, and then nonchalantly addressed the group. It's good to see Jose and Jesse having relaxing on their days off. They told me you Vados were wild hog hunting tonight, and maybe going fishing tomorrow after you process the pigs. Sounds like fun, and I wish I could be here, but my job keeps me away. Turning to Tim, he said, you are even more alone out here than normal. I got your neighbors to all go to town for a couple of days. I doubt I'll have much luck with Dora, Daniel, and the rest of y'all, but we got word today that a group of 5 gringo criminals wanted up in the Austin area in connection with 3 counts of attempted murder and multiple counts of conspiracy to kidnap have joined forces with a new gang, of sorts. They call themselves Los Angeles del Diablo now, but they have been around for a while. In fact, they pulled some stuff here in this county a few years back, but moved on. Now they claim the counties around US 90 west of San Antonio and the Del Rio area. They are known to smuggle and sell drugs and humans, and make and sell spicy movies. The 5 gringos may be involved in criminal enterprises with the Devil's Angels, but we aren't sure how or why they are allied. This is just rumor at this point, but an informant tells us that they intend to hunt down and kill a man and kidnap a woman in our fair county. The man, they claim, is the leader of a rival gang with which they have a feud, or something like that, and the woman is the estranged wife of one of the gringos. Los Angeles believe if they are successful, they can re-establish themselves in the counties of the brush country, buy off or kill the lawmen, and improve their smuggling routes. Killing off law enforcement will not happen, but sheriffs around the area agree that, if we nip this in the bud, everyone down here will be safer. We're maintaining patrols and have hidden scouts along county roads, and we're moving some of the people who are isolated to town until this blows over or gets reconciled. Like I say, all the neighbors around here are in town, so that just leaves you guys. He paused and acknowledged the 5 women who had walked up and were listening. And ladies out here, I know all of you except the Mendez have homes in town, or people you can stay with if you want to stay safe. Anyone ready to go to town? No one moved, so he continued, I didn't think you would. So I brought some state-of-the-art handheld radios you can use if you spot someone. I have them set on a frequency not monitored by anyone so you can communicate among yourselves. If you need to call us, one of the deputies can tell you the right frequency. He looked around and jokingly asked, No SEB bin cerveza hoy? Está bien. Drinking and hunting wild hogs is a bad idea. People could get sloppy and get hurt. It's also nice that you have a couple of nurses out here with you, just in case. He nodded to the group of men, doffed his hat to the ladies and said, Well, I have work to get back to. Caballeros y demás, vayan con Dios. The sheriff opened the door to his Bronco, paused, grinned, and said, I almost wish those idiotas would show up. I've heard all the stories about Pandilla Tassigillo y los Ratones de la Brasada, and I'd guess they would take a pretty strong interest in estos idiotas planning to take over their country. If they do take offense, I'm betting on them. Be safe, keep each other safe, and don't forget to duck if someone fires a shot at you instead of a pig. By 5 o'clock, the serving table was covered with all the makings for soft tacos, and the ice chests were full of soft drinks. The crowd of men had grown to 48, and there were a dozen women around. They ate, talked, went over the plans as a group, and then divided into 6 squads and went over their team and individual assignments. The women set up a half-dozen cots and opened the 2 chests of medical supplies. At 6, half of Los Ratones filtered out into La Brasada on the south side of the ranch, and the other half was taken in trucks to the north side. Tim, Jeannie, and Joe took the power wagon and drove to the gate, where a small dozer was parked. A big sign posted by the gate said "No trespassing. Intruders will be prosecuted. Armed intruders will be killed." There was a new banner beside it said, in English and Spanish, "Do you believe in heaven and hell? If you go past this sign, you will know for sure." Tim could see the tops of the portable light towers, but knew they would be invisible if you entered at night. When they got to the small creek before the hill the ranch house was on, they saw a mix of water and crude oil running slowly downstream to the earthen dam to the south. The dam backed water up all the way to the northern edge of the property, so the road was built up and there was a pipe 5 foot in diameter under it. "It's all in place," Joe said. "We've done the planning and preparation. We're as well set up as we can be before the party starts. Have you heard the saying, 'Men plan, the gods laugh'? That's why we've run so many scenarios, despite being confident we can force them into plan A. Now we have to see what happens and adjust. Whatever happens, Tim, our first responsibility is to Jeannie, then our troops, and then ourselves. Now, you 2 need to change into clothes you don't mind burning, just in case the fight comes to us." Tim merely nodded. Jeannie hugged his arm harder and frowned. The waiting was difficult, but the radios were greatly helpful for dealing with last-minute questions and issues. As dark settled over them, untold stars appeared in the moonless sky. The sky in South Texas at night is more like the sky the early explorers saw, unpolluted and with little humidity, allowing you to see stars and features of the Milky Way most people have never seen. The West Texas sky was incomparable in Texas for stargazing, but the brush country was second. Tim, Joe, and Jeannie sat in the wooden chairs around the fire pit, gazing at and discussing the clusters and creatures in the sky. There was no fire because they couldn't allow themselves to lose visual acuity from staring at a fire, but they enjoyed the mild weather and the starlit night. The radio cackled, warning that the sheriff's department had spotted a convoy of 4 vehicles on the farm to Market Road, about 15 minutes away. Everyone was ready. Everything was in place. They offered a prayer and continued talking, albeit with faster heart rates. They saw the headlights on the county road and watched them turn in and proceed to the ranch entrance. They spent some time at the entrance, cutting the chain and talking, it appeared, before driving forward. They disappeared into the low area where the creek ran, and the lights disappeared. Joe picked up his rifle and 2 spare magazines and moved to his station, behind a mound of dirt to the south of the house. He had a clear view of anyone approaching the house from the east, where the ranch entrance road ran, and the west, which was an unlikely entry because it would require walking 3 miles through the brush. Tim and Jeannie went inside and turned on lights. Tim turned on the mic, activated the stand-mounted speakers outside using the amplifier, and, using his most threatening voice, repeated the warning posted at the gate in Spanish, "Advertencia, sin grises an invitation, no seira." After a moment, he repeated it in English. Jeannie keyed the tape, and the haunting strains of Diguelos swept over the hillside and across the ranch. The gringos wouldn't know the call, but the Mexicanos would understand the meaning. No mercy. The bugles and drums continued playing the music Santa Ana played at the Alamo, but the night began to come alive. First, a glow rose from the crude oil-filled creek, which Daniel and Chewy had set afire. The light towers along the killing field the intruders had been lured into turned on, bathing the area and the men creeping through it in light. Some turned and fired at the light towers, which brought a barrage from the closest battle stations. The vehicle in the back exploded, blocking any possible exit via the road. Some invaders fell as bullets tore into them. Others began running forward toward the house on the hill, only to encounter deadly fire from the next stations on the north and west. Some tried to fall back, but the Ratones from the first stations had closed in behind them and were firing from the flanks, forcing the survivors further into the funnel that was the planned battle zone, which had become the killing field. More and more invaders fell as the firing from both sides intensified. 3 made it past the final battle stations and ran toward the house, firing through the windows at the silhouettes they could see behind the shades. A single shot rang out and 1 fell. The other 2 kept running and firing at the house. They entered the fence without resistance. 1 ran to the front door, the other circled around the north side toward the back door. Larry Barnes threw the front door open and spotted Jeannie standing across the room in the bedroom doorway. His semi-automatic rifle was pointing toward his helpless wife as he advanced on her. "You worthless 304. I'm going to beat you senseless and then sell you in Mexico." Jeannie cried, "And oh, you aren't. You piece of shit. You're going straight to hell." He stopped when an automatic shotgun hidden behind the bedroom wall appeared in her hands. He raised his AR to his shoulder, but Jeannie fired from the hip. A bloody hole the size of a volleyball opened in the area of his groin. The AR dropped beside him as he collapsed onto the plastic sheeting covering the floor. Shock and agony spread over his face as he lay on the floor trying to contain the blood and hold his remaining guts in place. The back door burst open, and JW entered with AR extended. Searching ahead and to each side for a target, he spotted Larry, jumped into the room, and turned to his right. A machete appeared from behind the door and cut deeply into his bicep just above the elbow. He screamed and dropped the weapon. Tim stepped from behind the door, swung the bloody machete with the flat side, striking JW on the nose and knocking him onto the table, where he lay sprawled in a daze with blood running from his nose and mouth. The AR fell on the floor, and Tim kicked it under the table. He sliced JW's other bicep, and then laid the sharp machete blade on JW's belt, across his crotch, and between his spread legs. He looked into JW's terrified eyes and dispassionately proclaimed, "You are responsible for all this, you know? You just had to seduce every woman you came across, married or single. The ones you couldn't seduce you drugged, and then bragged about it. You filmed your conquest so you could blackmail them, and so you could show it to your friends and admirers. You invited the scum you wanted to impress, or used to join in. You found a criminal gang stupid enough to buy your trashy videos, featuring fat guts and pathetically small men, and to buy the women when you were ready to discard them. You and you alone are responsible for what has happened to your friends and compatriots tonight, and for what is about to happen to you." Tim pulled the machete downward quickly, slicing into JW's pants and the top of his tool. He screamed in pain and fear, begging for mercy but seeing none in the eyes of the man he betrayed, tried to humiliate, and attempted to kill. "I will extend to you the same mercy you offered Jeannie, Dana, Carla, Jennifer, and the others. None at all. Oh, you will scream, you will beg, you will cry, you will piss and shit on yourself, and then you will beg still more. At some point, you will beg me to kill you. But I'll keep you alive and suffering as long as I can. I want you to announce your arrival in hell wearing a grotesque mask of pain, so the devil can see what a piece of shit you are." Tim sliced JW's left thigh deeply. He screamed and blood flowed freely. "Don't get excited, piece of shit. That hurts, but it will take an hour to bleed out, and by then it will be the least of your problems." He placed the machete inside JW's right calf and drew it toward himself slowly, causing another scream. "Tell me this, what the made you think turning my wife into a spicy queen was a good idea? You used to live in South Texas. Didn't you hear the stories?" "No, man, I swear," JW promised. "If I had known you were the man behind the legend, I'd have kept 100 yards away from her. When I did find out, it was too late, and then we had to kill you before you could kill us." Tim looked at Jeannie, who was watching and listening, her shotgun still trained on Larry. He was weakly staring at the stone face of his wife. He saw no mercy in that face, but begged anyway. She coldly replied, "What mercy did you show me when you beat me? You last time you gave me a bad concussion, fractured my eye socket, and bruised my ribs and kidney. Did you get help for me? Did you let me call for help? Well, Larry dearest, now you know how I felt. The problem you have is that no one will come save you as Tim saved me. No one will care for you, heal you, and help you become stronger than ever. No, Larry, you will die here on this floor. Your body will be buried in a mass grave in the middle of nowhere, and you will roast in hell for eternity. Jeannie, step outside and call your dad. We need to make sure he is all right, and check the status of the others. He's got the radio." She stepped out the door and called, only to hear another scream from JW, whose right cheek was now laid open, blood pouring down his face onto his shoulder. Joe took her in his arms and hugged her, made sure she was all okay, and then told her to stay outside and calm down. He started inside, and heard another horrible scream. JW's pants were sliced from a hole to this ball, and blood was pouring out. Joe spoke to Tim, and then put his hand gently on the arm holding the machete. "There are things we need to know, Tim, and he can tell us. Give me the machete and step outside for a moment. Jeannie just shot her husband and she needs you." Tim looked at the old soldier, nodded, stepped out the door, and took Jeannie in his arms. He could hear Joe speaking calmly to Rogers, telling him they needed answers from him, but would let Tim take over again if he didn't tell the truth. Nate's truck drove up the road and stopped. He, Daniel, Chewy, Jesse, and Jose stepped out, and Chivo climbed out of the back. He said, "We have another one of yours in the back, Teo." The fat pig was hiding in the brush, sobbing like a little girl. "He smells like piss and shit, so don't bring him inside." Tim looked over the sidewall at Barry Benton, trussed up like a wild hog. He turned to Chivo and Nate. "Back up to the hoist where we skin deer and hogs. We'll pull him up, hose him off, cut his clothes off, and then start slicing him up piece by piece until he tells us everything we need to know." Joe is interrogating JW. "But I think I may have cut him a little too deeply too soon. We'll let Chivo cut this pig up. He's better with a knife than I am with a machete." Tim turned to Chewy and Daniel. "Is everyone okay?" They both smiled broadly, and the response came from Chewy, "Nothing but a few scratches on our side. But the enemy lost all but this pig and 3 of the devil's angels, and those 3 were wounded." "What happened here?" "You know we didn't want to let those 3 go, but you insisted." "Still, it looks like you, Jeannie, and Joe are all uninjured." Jeannie appeared beside him, put her arm around him, and answered, "We're fine. Larry is gut shot and dying, and Rogers is wishing he could die. My shotgun nearly tore Larry in half, and Tim was using his machete on Rogers." Chewy, Daniel, and Nate studied Jeannie carefully, and then Tim. Jeannie didn't blink or change expression when she continued. "I know you're all worried about me, but I'm okay. We tried to do things right. I pressed charges for wife abuse. Tim took Karen to court to get custody of their kids. We laid out our cases, the courts agreed. Karen then conspired with the 7 men to kill Tim and get their sons, and tonight it all came to a climax, way out here. My only question is, what now?" "Now we clean up the mess," exclaimed Jesse as he walked up to them. "The cleaning crew is on their way up here. I'll oversee them." A crew is loading the pieces of the blown-up pickup on a flatbed trailer with a front loader as we speak. Another crew is loading bodies on another flatbed, while the others gather the weapons and all the brass we can find. Their brass and weapons will go into the grave with the bodies and the pickup remains. We'll decide what to do with the vans after I talk to Tim. What are your plans for the tub of shit you have strung up on the hoist? We plan to find out all we can. If he tells us everything we want to know, we'll decide what to do with him. If he doesn't, he will be buried with the others in an hour or 2. After he stops suffering and dies, Tim answered. 2 sets of vehicle lights came up the interior road from the barn, and 4 women got out of each. The cleanup crew went directly inside carrying supplies, while the 2 nurses checked Tim and Jeannie, and then went inside to check on Joe. Moments later, Joe called for help. Chewy and Daniel drug Rogers outside, sobbing. There were now dozens of slices, nicks, and shallow stab wounds, plus the big cuts Tim inflicted. Joe flatly stated, "I don't think he knows anything else, so, Tim, he's yours." Tim grabbed him by the mop of curly black hair he was always so proud of, and began dragging him to the hoist. He screamed and twisted, but couldn't use his arms or legs to fight back. Daniel and Chewy grabbed his legs and lifted him off the ground. He screamed louder. They dumped him in front of the hoist, where Chivo had hung Benton and cut off his clothes. Chivo shined a light on Benton, and then on Rogers. "See that, fat pig? That's how you're going to look in 15 minutes, unless you tell us everything you know. The names of everyone involved, the roles they played, and where the rest are now." The look of terror on Benton's face was satisfying to Tim, as was Rogers's pain. "Take your time with this fat pig, but make sure he tells us everything. I haven't decided yet whether to kill them both, or cut off their tongues and balls and sell them as cat hoey to the gay brothels in Southeast Asia or South America. So keep them alive if you can. However, if they won't cooperate, kill them as painfully as possible and we will go on from there." 2 hours later, the house was immaculate, although there was a bleach smell. Jeannie and Tim had blood splatters on them, so they showered, changed, and their old clothes were added to the burn pile. The remains of JW's pickup were gone, as were all the bodies. Neither Rogers nor Benton survived interrogation, but both sang like canaries for the recorder. Ranger Boyd was going to be very interested in the names of others involved. The 2 deputies had spoken to someone, and all 3 vans left the property soon after with the surviving Devil's Angels. Jeannie and Tim had stayed outside, out of the way, while the work crews did their things. Everyone else except Joe was gone. The 3 of them built a small fire and sat around the pit. Little was said, but the silence was comfortable. The fire had burned away by midnight, and so did their energy. Each retired to their own bed, and each was surprised at how quickly sleep came. Dear listeners, the final part will be out in a few hours. Meanwhile, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.